Millionaire disguises himself as a chauffeur to test his rich fiancée's family, but what he discovers breaks his heart. Now he must make a decision that changes everything. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Daniel Matthews stood by the wide windows of his penthouse in Midtown Manhattan, gazing at the city's glimmering skyline. The gentle hum of traffic below blended with the static sound of late-night news on the TV behind him. He was a tall man of 40, with strong shoulders and dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples. His face, etched with both determination and subtle lines of weariness, reflected a life of constant striving. At a glance, one would think he had everything: fame, money, and soon a high-profile wedding. But that evening, as he watched the lights of the city, he felt a weight on his chest that he couldn't ignore. His phone vibrated gently on the sleek marble counter, drawing him away from his silent vigil. The caller ID flashed the name of his personal assistant, John. He hesitated before answering. Lately, the prospect of any news, big or small, felt more like an intrusion than an update. Still, he couldn't entirely disregard it. "Daniel," came John's voice, careful and respectful. "I just wanted to confirm the date for the next board meeting. Are we still set for after the wedding?" Daniel's mind drifted momentarily. The wedding. He was set to marry Victoria Winchester in just 2 weeks. The media had named it the union of two dynasties, his technology empire merging with her family's real estate legacy. On paper, it was perfect. In the countless society magazines scattered across Manhattan's upscale cafes, their engagement photos beamed with glossy perfection. However, doubt had been casting a shadow in Daniel's mind for some time, a persistent worry that was now difficult to ignore. "Let's keep it after the ceremony," Daniel said quietly, pressing a hand against his forehead. "I need a bit of calm before everything hits full speed." He ended the call and turned off the television, trying to recapture the hush of his penthouse. In the reflection of the window, he saw the faintest tremor in his hand. His gut told him that something wasn't right, not about the board meeting, but about Victoria and the wedding itself. The mansion in the Hamptons was already rented. The chefs and staff had been hired for the week-long festivities, and invitations had long since gone out to half of New York's elite. Yet beneath that veneer of glamour, an unnameable tension gnawed at him. Daniel had built his fortune through tenacity and brilliance in the tech sector. Growing up, money had been scarce. His parents divorced when he was 12. His mother worked 2 jobs while his father struggled to rebuild a failing construction business. Young Daniel watched them fight over finances until, eventually, his mother left with a broken heart and almost nothing in her bank account. That memory fueled Daniel's ambition to succeed on his own terms. Over time, he grew wary of people's motives, colleagues, partners, even girlfriends, never entirely certain who genuinely cared for him and who saw him only as a stepping stone to wealth. It was precisely that hard-earned caution that now caused him to scrutinize his fiancée and her formidable family. Something felt off. Victoria, in her early 30s, was strikingly elegant, with honey blonde hair always styled to perfection and a polished demeanor that never wavered, even under pressure. They had met at a charity benefit, a glamorous affair where they were introduced by mutual friends. Within months, they became the talk of Manhattan. Everyone remarked how Victoria balanced Daniel's serious nature with her sparkling social presence. He closed his eyes, recalling a moment at a recent gala. He'd spotted Victoria on a balcony, her back turned to him. She was speaking to her father, Charles Winchester, a powerful man known for his sharp business tactics in real estate. Though Daniel could not make out every word, he noticed their hushed yet intense exchange. When Victoria turned to see him, the surprise on her face was more akin to alarm than delight at her fiancé's arrival. That fleeting reaction planted a seed of doubt in him, and it had been growing steadily ever since. "Am I just imagining things?" he murmured to himself, stepping away from the window and heading toward his minimalist desk. He pulled open a drawer, taking out a thick binder marked prenuptial agreement. His attorneys had insisted on meticulous clauses to protect his assets, but Victoria's readiness to sign without question felt too smooth. Could she and her family be operating on a more cunning level, ensuring that once she and Daniel wed, they could seize control of parts of his empire? A soft sigh escaped him. He wanted love, not a business merger. The fear of being deceived, of giving his heart and trust to someone undeserving, pressed heavily on him. He reminded himself that not everyone was like his past partners, some of whom only desired his money and public image. Victoria had shown genuine warmth at times. She had comforted him during a stressful product launch, shared glimpses of her upbringing that resonated with his own complicated youth. Yet, the rumors swirling around the Winchester name created an uneasy swirl in his mind. As the clock neared midnight, Daniel gently closed the binder. There was no way to fully confirm his suspicions without taking a risk, and if they were false, he might lose Victoria's trust. But if they were true, and he did nothing, he might lose far more. He glanced again at the Manhattan skyline, then dimmed the lights in his apartment. Though he was determined to uncover the truth, he found himself wishing, for the briefest moment, that all of his doubts were simply illusions. Yet the feeling in his chest refused to vanish, leaving him alone with a question he had no immediate answer for. A brilliant early morning sun illuminated Daniel's living room, highlighting every modern contour and polished surface of the penthouse. He was in the middle of finishing a business memo when his phone buzzed. The caller was Henry Braxton, an old college friend whose name Daniel hadn't seen on the screen for nearly a year. They had once been close, studying endless nights, competing for internships in Silicon Valley, but life had drawn them along different paths. He picked up, voice cautious. "Henry, this is a surprise." "It's been a while, Dan," Henry replied, using the nickname only a handful of friends still did. "I heard about your upcoming wedding. Congratulations." Daniel cleared his throat, noticing a tension in Henry's tone. "Thank you. It's a lot of prep, to say the least." "Yes, I'm sure. Listen, I don't mean to pry, but I caught wind of something at a reception last night. Heard Victoria's father in a conversation that sounded questionable." Daniel's heart tightened. He pressed the phone closer. "What kind of conversation?" "There was a hint that Charles Winchester is negotiating with certain investment groups to move funds around, funds supposedly tied to your companies. People are speculating that once you two are married, they'd have enough leverage to, I don't know, maybe claim a portion of your assets or manipulate your shares. No one's certain yet, but it's raising eyebrows in a few circles." Daniel absorbed the words, a chill running up his spine. He tried to keep his tone composed. "You're sure you heard this from credible people?" "I'd never call you unless I thought this was solid," Henry said quietly. "We were friends once, remember? I couldn't stand by and not tell you." Daniel felt a long breath leave his lungs. He'd been half expecting a rumor like this, ever since that uneasy moment at the gala with Victoria and her father, yet hearing it confirmed by Henry made it all the more real. "I appreciate you telling me," Daniel replied. "I'll handle it. Be careful. The Winchesters are powerful, and your reputation is valuable." After the call ended, Daniel paced the living room. With the wedding less than 2 weeks away, he needed to tread carefully. The mansion in the Hamptons was ready to host the myriad of guests arriving soon for the pre-wedding festivities. Everything had been orchestrated for a flawless celebration. Yet behind the scenes, an entirely different narrative seemed to be unfolding. Anxious, he clicked on his laptop and pulled up the news. A few business columns mentioned the Winchesters' interest in new real estate ventures, but there was nothing about a takeover or suspicious deals. The tabloids, for their part, showed gushing headlines like "Tech Mogul Marries Real Estate Royalty," featuring photos of Daniel and Victoria at fancy events. If there was a scheme underway, it was kept well out of the public eye. With the tension mounting, Daniel called his assistant, John, who had been his right-hand man for years. John was loyal, reliable, and knew how to keep a secret when it mattered. "Yes, Mr. Matthews," came John's steady voice. "I need to look into something. The Winchesters might be planning a corporate maneuver," Daniel exhaled, trying to keep his tone calm. "Could you discreetly find out if they've been buying any stakes in my companies, or if there's an unusual activity in the stock market associated with my name?" John didn't hesitate. "Of course, I'll get on it right away. Should I call the legal team?" Daniel paused. "Not yet. Let's keep it within our circle for now. I don't want to alarm anyone unless we have concrete proof." He hung up and sat down at the kitchen table, the hum of the penthouse's air conditioning filling the room. The memory of Victoria's wide smile danced before him. He recalled how she'd once soothed him in his moment of stress, whispering reassuring words in his ear. The woman he knew could not have orchestrated something this manipulative, unless he hadn't truly known her at all. As minutes slipped into an hour, Daniel found himself revisiting his past relationships. He remembered an ex-partner who seemed perfect on the surface, but secretly sold company information to a competitor. That betrayal had been a lesson. Never rely on appearances alone. Yet no matter how cautious he tried to be, he still wanted to believe in genuine love. In a restless effort to ease his mind, he stepped onto his balcony, letting the cool breeze brush against his face. From that height, Manhattan looked peaceful, almost serene, though he knew better. The city was a maze of ambition and hidden agendas, much like the hearts of the people who roamed its streets. He glanced at a framed photo on the living room shelf, a candid shot of him and Victoria laughing in Central Park. Her golden hair caught the sunlight, and her arm was wrapped around his shoulders in an affectionate gesture. He remembered how genuinely happy he had felt in that moment. Now, he wondered if that memory was tainted by illusions. A subtle ring on his phone indicated a message from John. "No immediate evidence, but I'll keep digging. Let's stay on alert." Closing his eyes, Daniel balanced the phone in his hand, debating his next move. He refused to become a paranoid groom who accuses his fiancée without proof. Yet doing nothing felt equally foolish. He had to make a plan, to confirm or dispel these rumors before the wedding day arrived. And that plan, though not fully formed, started shaping itself in the back of his mind as he gazed upon the city that had taught him both triumph and heartbreak. Late that afternoon, Daniel found himself standing in his minimalist office, high above the bustling streets. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in natural light, revealing sleek furnishings in neutral tones. A modern sculpture near the entrance, an abstract piece of polished metal, reflected distorted glimpses of his face as he walked past. He had decided to clear his schedule for the evening, feeling too on edge to entertain the usual parade of meetings and calls. He paced, replaying Henry's warning in his mind. Each new step across the plush carpet fueled a growing unease. Once, when he was younger, he might have brushed off a friend's rumor. But now, at 40, with past betrayals still stinging, he was unwilling to dismiss anything that smelled of deceit. A soft knock sounded on the door. It was Carla, his executive assistant, a no-nonsense woman in her late 30s with sharp features and an impeccable sense of style. She held a stack of folders in one arm and balanced a cup of coffee in the other. "Mr. Matthews," she greeted, pushing a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I have the files you requested on the new software initiative. Should I leave them here?" Daniel motioned for her to come in. "Yes, Carla. Put them on the desk." Carla placed the folders down, then glanced at him, concern flickering in her eyes. "You seem a bit preoccupied. Is everything all right?" He forced a half smile. "Just personal issues. Nothing to trouble yourself over." She studied him for a moment. "If you need anything, professional or otherwise, just let me know." After she left, the office felt emptier than before. He rifled through a few pages of the proposed software expansion, but found it nearly impossible to concentrate. A dull ache settled behind his eyes. The conversation with Henry had triggered memories of past deceptions. In one particularly painful recollection, an old girlfriend had convinced him to invest in her startup, only for him to discover that she'd siphoned funds to prop up a secret gambling addiction. The humiliation of that incident had taught him never to hand out trust easily again. Yet Victoria was different, or at least he had always believed so. They had bonded over philanthropic efforts, hosting charity dinners to support homeless shelters in Manhattan. The warmth he thought he saw in her eyes during those events had convinced him that maybe, just maybe, she was genuine. Now that trust wavered, replaced by a nagging thought. Had she been playing a role all along? As the afternoon slid into early evening, Daniel left the office, deciding that a walk outside might clear his head. The crisp autumn air was a welcome change from the temperature-controlled environment of the building. He strolled a few blocks until he found a small park with scattered benches. An older woman fed pigeons, tossing bits of bread while humming a quiet tune. Her easy contentment contrasted sharply with the turmoil in Daniel's thoughts. He sat on a nearby bench, gazing at the city lights that began to blink on as dusk approached. Against the backdrop of Manhattan's towering skyscrapers, his concerns felt both monumental and strangely insignificant. He considered what it would mean to cancel the wedding so close to the ceremony date. It would cause a media frenzy, overshadow the philanthropic projects he and Victoria had planned, and possibly erode years of careful business relationships. Worse, it could confirm the cynic's belief that he was an eccentric tech mogul who trusted no one. But an even darker fear gnawed at him. If he went through with the wedding without confronting his suspicions, and if those suspicions turned out to be true, he would be betraying himself. Nothing frightened him more than the possibility of repeating old mistakes, ignoring red flags out of desperation for genuine love. A pair of teenagers jogged by, chatting animatedly about weekend plans. He envied their carefree laughter, recalling a time when he, too, roamed these city streets with nothing but optimism for the future. There was a period in his youth when he believed the world was full of possibilities, untarnished by greed or hidden agendas. Now, adulthood had taught him harsh lessons about the duplicity lurking behind polished smiles. Rising from the bench, Daniel took a deep breath and decided to head home. He slipped into the sidewalk crowd, weaving between briefcases and cell phones and half-burned cigarettes on the pavement. The city felt more overwhelming than ever, a sea of lives each carrying their own secrets and ambitions. At the penthouse door, he paused before inserting the key card. He thought of Victoria, picturing her relaxed on the sofa, maybe reading over the wedding itinerary. Would she greet him with a gentle kiss or a suspicious question about where he'd been? He realized he had no certainty anymore. He stepped inside, his reflection in the hallway mirror reminding him of the changes in his face since he first met Victoria. He looked older, more guarded, feeling an urgent need for clarity. He told himself that the time for hesitation was drawing to a close. He needed to decide on a course of action, something that would either ease his fears or confirm them. A phone call or direct confrontation could give him some answers, but might also raise suspicion. Another, More covert plan began forming in his mind, one that would require greater risk but might finally unveil the truth about the Winchesters. He could scarcely believe he was considering it, but given his track record of heartbreak and betrayal, he felt there was no choice left but to take a leap into the unknown. On a grey, drizzly morning, Daniel arrived at a trendy brunch spot in the West Village for a meeting he had neither arranged nor entirely looked forward to. Victoria had texted the night before, asking if he could meet her father, Charles Winchester, for a friendly chat about the upcoming wedding. The subtext was clear. Charles had a plan, and Daniel was expected to hear it. Umbrella in hand, Daniel stepped inside, shaking the raindrops onto a decorative mat. The restaurant was polished and upscale, with marble-top tables and modern art. He spotted Charles immediately, at a corner table, waving a large hand in greeting. Charles was in his late 50s, robust in build, with silver-flecked hair and a face that wore perpetual confidence. The watch on his wrist gleamed with silent opulence. "Daniel," Charles boomed, rising to offer a firm handshake. "You're looking well." "Sit, sit." They took their seats, and a waiter promptly appeared with menus. Charles declined politely, saying he already had his coffee. Daniel ordered a simple black coffee and waited, curiosity and unease mingling within him. "I hope you don't mind my calling this little get-together," Charles said, leaning back in his chair. "These next couple of weeks will be busy, so I thought it wise for us to touch base about some important matters." "Family matters," Daniel inclined his head. "I appreciate the initiative." Charles's smile held a calculated warmth. "As you know, the Winchesters take pride in how we conduct business, be it personal or professional. I understand you're a man of equal standing in your realm, so I'm sure you get the importance of synergy, especially where large finances and reputations are concerned." Daniel caught the subtext immediately. He responded with careful politeness. "I do believe in synergy, though for me, it's also about transparency. I like to be in the loop." Charles's gaze sharpened slightly. "Well said. Which brings me to a small suggestion. Once you're officially part of the family, it might be beneficial for you to take it easy for a while. Perhaps step back from the daily grind at your tech corporation. You'll be husband to Victoria, after all, and a face for our combined philanthropic efforts. Public appearances, charity events, it'll require a lot of energy." Daniel's brow furrowed. He recognized the tactic, encouraging him to cede some control of his company. If he stepped back, Victoria or Charles could start weaving themselves into the organization's core. "I see. That's quite the suggestion," he replied neutrally. "I only mention it because I know the stress of running a major business. It can really wear you down, and we wouldn't want our new family member feeling overwhelmed. Anyway," Charles continued with a dismissive wave, "it's food for thought. Let me know if you need any help making those transitions." Daniel studied him, trying to keep his expression composed. "I appreciate the concern. I'll consider it." A new hush fell between them as the waiter returned, placing Daniel's coffee on a small saucer. Charles sipped from his own cup, then cleared his throat. "I've also spoken with Victoria about the final wedding details. She mentioned you were partial to a smaller ceremony, but we felt it best to go big. This is a momentous occasion for both families, after all." Daniel's mind flickered back to the rumor Henry had shared about corporate maneuvering. He suspected the extravagance was not just about the wedding, it was about showcasing power, drawing in certain influential circles, maybe forging alliances that would benefit the Winchesters down the line. "I'm not opposed to a big event," Daniel replied, choosing his words carefully. "I just want to ensure we keep the essence of what the wedding is supposed to be about." Charles laughed, a hearty sound that attracted a few curious glances from other patrons. "Essence, yes, but let's not forget we have a brand to uphold, son." A prickle of discomfort ran through Daniel at the word son. a brand to uphold. Was that what their union meant to Charles? Just another brand collaboration? They wrapped up the meeting, exchanging pleasantries. Charles insisted on paying the bill, remarking that soon enough everything would be in the family. With a firm handshake, he left Daniel alone at the table, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a heavier rain. Daniel slipped into the back seat of his waiting car, but as he sank into the leather, he couldn't shake off the heaviness in his chest. Charles's friendly facade had done little to hide the underlying pressure. He clearly intended for Daniel to relax his grip on his company. Before heading back to his penthouse, Daniel instructed the driver to take a detour through a quieter stretch of Manhattan. He needed a moment to reflect. The conversation with Charles hammered home the reality that something was indeed amiss. The Winchesters didn't just want to merge families, they wanted to maneuver themselves into a position that could compromise his corporate independence. He passed by a modest diner with neon lights flickering in the afternoon gloom, a stark contrast to the high-end brunch venue he'd just left. He realized then how far removed he had become from ordinary life, and how easy it was for powerful figures like Charles to orchestrate plans behind polished smiles. Clutching his phone, Daniel scrolled through messages, one from Victoria asking if he was all right, another from an event planner confirming the arrival date for the wedding caterers. He typed a non-committal reply to Victoria, then paused. Deep in his gut, he knew time was running out. He had to decide whether to confront her directly or find a more subtle way to confirm his fears. As he neared his building, an uneasy resolution formed in his mind. He'd never been the type for elaborate schemes, but this time he might have no other choice. The look in Charles's eyes had convinced him that if he didn't act soon, the Winchesters would. By the next evening, Daniel was sitting alone in his spacious living room, every overhead light turned off, relying solely on the ambient glow from the city beyond his windows. He had grown accustomed to spending late nights in partial darkness. Somehow, it helped him think more clearly. On the coffee table lay his laptop, open to the internal email system for his company. The cursor blinked, awaiting a message he was struggling to articulate. He was about to send a memo to John, a request for something unusual, the creation of a fake identity for a part-time driver. Daniel had heard that Victoria's usual chauffeur would be away for medical reasons during the pre-wedding celebrations in the Hamptons. It felt like the perfect window of opportunity to insert himself into the Winchester household, unseen in plain sight. He typed slowly, carefully so as not to betray any detail that might later seem suspicious. The email was brief, a request to arrange all the necessary documents, background checks, and references for a man named James Whitley. He gave instructions that the driver should appear to be from a respectable but humble background, with no ties to Daniel or his corporation. Once done, Daniel reviewed it 3 times before hitting send. His heart pounded. This plan, disguising himself to observe Victoria's family, seemed risky and even dishonest. Yet part of him felt oddly at peace with the decision. The alternative was to confront Victoria or Charles directly with nothing more than rumors. With his personal history of being manipulated, he wanted concrete proof before taking any drastic steps. His phone rang unexpectedly, the screen lighting up with Victoria's name. He answered, trying to maintain a casual tone. "Hey, darling." She sounded cheerful. "I was just checking on you. You've seemed distant lately, and you left brunch with my father in such a hurry." Daniel forced a smile into his voice. "It was a busy day. Your father and I had a good talk, though it's all just wedding stress, I suppose." Her laugh sparkled through the line. "That's completely normal, you know. The wedding is just a little over a week away, and everyone is counting on us to make it spectacular." She paused, voice softening. "Are you all right, truly?" He hesitated. "I will be. Don't worry. We can talk more when we're out in the Hamptons." "Of course," she said. a hint of relief in her tone. "I'll be heading there early next week to oversee final arrangements. Just promise me you'll join me as soon as you can. People will expect us to be there together." "I promise," Daniel replied. Then he added quietly, "I love you, Victoria." "I love you too," she said, almost automatically, and ended the call. He set the phone aside, exhaling deeply. If only he could have felt reassurance in her words. Instead, a hollow sensation clung to him. His suspicions remained, refusing to be quelled by the promise of love. That same night, he met John in a private conference room at his corporate headquarters. It was late enough that most employees had gone home, leaving the corridors silent. John arrived precisely on time, carrying a slim folder. "Mr. Matthews," he greeted, his loyal gaze flicking to the security camera above. "We're good to talk here?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, the cameras only record video in this room, no audio. Just keep your voice low." John set the folder on the table. "These are the documents for James Whitley, including a driver's license, references, and some background details. Everything looks real enough for any casual inspection." Daniel flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he took in the fictional biography of his alter ego. He saw a photo of himself, lightly edited so that if one didn't look too closely, they wouldn't suspect it was the same Daniel Matthews who appeared in magazines. There was a new mustache added, slightly receding hair, and a different expression. "Perfect," Daniel muttered, though the word felt strange in this context. "I want you to contact the staffing agency. Give them the reference for James Whitley and see to it that he's assigned to the Winchester's property in the Hamptons." John nodded, a flicker of concern passing over his features. "Sir, may I speak freely?" Daniel closed the folder. "Of course, this is quite a risk. If you're discovered, the media backlash alone could be brutal, not to mention the damage to your personal relationships. Are you sure about this?" Staring at the forged ID photo, Daniel felt the weight of his plans settle on him. "I'm not sure about anything except that I need to know the truth. I've spent too many years second-guessing people's motives. If Victoria and her family have nothing to hide, this will be an embarrassing but harmless stunt. If not," John nodded solemnly, "then you'll have protected yourself before it was too late." They shook hands. Within minutes, John was gone, leaving Daniel in the quiet conference room, surrounded by the hum of the overhead lights. He gathered the folder, slipping it into a locked briefcase. On his way out, he caught sight of his reflection in a glass partition. Dressed in a sleek suit, he looked every bit the successful mogul ready to marry into an influential family. Yet behind the polished exterior, a swirl of uncertainty gnawed at him. By assuming this new identity, he was crossing a moral line, lying to the very people he planned to call family. But if those people were indeed planning a deception of their own, perhaps it was a necessary act of self-preservation. Daniel left the building, stepping into the night air. He realized that the final pieces of his plan were in motion. The next time he set foot in the Hamptons, he wouldn't be Daniel Matthews, billionaire groom-to-be. He would be James Whitley, a humble driver, ready to discover just how genuine his bride and her powerful family really were. Daniel sat in his office one late evening, reviewing the forged documents that identified him as James Whitley. His heart pounded at the sight of his slightly altered photograph, the artificially receded hairline, and the new name typed in bold letters. He knew the day was fast approaching when he'd have to don this identity and slip into the Winchester estate in the Hamptons as a humble driver. Every so often, doubt would flicker across his mind, but he forced it aside, reminding himself that he needed tangible proof of any wrongdoing before confronting Victoria or her family. A low knock at the door signaled John's arrival. Dressed in a neatly pressed suit, his shoulders carried their usual composure, though concern clouded his features. He settled into the chair across from Daniel. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The silence spoke volumes about the gravity of the plan taking shape between them. "So," John said softly, folding his hands in his lap, "I've confirmed everything with the staffing agency. They believe James Whitley to be a real person. The Winchester household has signed off on a temporary driver for the upcoming festivities. You're all set." Daniel exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate it. I know this is beyond the scope of what you signed up for, but you're the only one I trust with something like this." A faint smile tugged at John's lips. "I've been at your side through some complicated deals, Daniel. This one just happens to be more personal." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flip phone, sliding it across the desk. "Use this instead of your usual cell. I've programmed only my number and Carla's, in case you need urgent help. I don't want any trace leading back to you." Daniel picked up the phone, turning it over in his hand. It was simple and cheaply made, so different from the sleek devices his company developed. "Thank you," he said, setting it aside. "What about the legal front? Have we found any new evidence of Charles or Victoria buying shares under the radar?" John shook his head. "Nothing conclusive yet, but they could be doing it through intermediaries. We've seen slight shifts in market movements, but no smoking gun. You might find that proof more easily from the inside." A quiet settled over the office again. Through the tinted windows, the Manhattan skyline glimmered, a testament to Daniel's achievements in technology, yet he felt more vulnerable than ever before. Leaning forward, he lowered his voice, though they were entirely alone. "John, you've known me a long time. Am I making a mistake? Am I letting paranoia run the show?" John's gaze was steady. "Daniel, you're a thoughtful man. You never jump to conclusions without good reason. If your instincts are telling you to proceed, there's likely truth behind them. I don't think you're being paranoid. Cautious, yes, but not paranoid." Daniel considered this. He thought of how John had joined him nearly a decade ago. Back when his tech startup was just beginning to gain traction, John was the one who had watched him negotiate major contracts, the one who had consoled him when early partners let him down or tried to exploit him. If there was a single person in this world who fully grasped Daniel's reluctance to trust, it was John. "What if I discover something that's beyond what I can handle?" Daniel asked, almost in a whisper. "That's where you have people like me," John replied with quiet conviction. "You won't be facing it alone." Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. He realized in that moment that John was more than just an assistant. He was a mentor of sorts, a voice of reason and steadfast support. This covert plan might be Daniel's own doing, but without John's unwavering help, he wouldn't have been able to pull it off. The seeds of courage had been planted in Daniel's heart long ago, but John's calm presence nurtured them. They spent the next hour ironing out final details. How Daniel would maintain a low profile, what steps he'd take if Victoria or Charles recognized him, and contingency plans if it all fell apart. Daniel scribbled notes on a yellow pad, circling key points. He knew he'd be risking everything, his reputation, his relationship, and possibly major business alliances if he were caught. But after hearing Henry's warning and enduring Charles's veiled threats about easing off work, Daniel believed this disguise was the only way to confirm his suspicions. Eventually, John stood to leave. At the door, he paused, looking back at Daniel with an unreadable expression. "You know how to reach me if anything goes wrong. Try to get some rest before you head out. You'll need a clear mind once you're there." Daniel gave him a grateful nod. As John disappeared into the dimly lit corridor, Daniel felt the weight of the documents in his hands. He recognized, with a pang of mixed relief and trepidation, that the path before him was set. Soon, He would trade his life of affluence for the subdued uniform and responsibilities of a driver. He could only hope that the truth, whatever it turned out to be, would set him free from the web of uncertainties that had plagued him for too long. The following morning, Daniel found himself in his bedroom, staring at a row of custom-tailored suits hanging neatly in the walk-in closet. He reached for one instinctively, a sleek navy piece that had become his go-to outfit for business meetings. But as his hand brushed the smooth fabric, he paused. In just a day's time, he'd be driving out to the Hamptons with far simpler clothing, disguised as James Whitley. The stark difference between these two wardrobes was a vivid reminder of the line he was about to cross. He lowered his arm, turning instead to a suitcase near the bed. Inside lay the well-worn jeans, plain polo shirts, and a low-key black jacket he'd purchased to suit the persona of a regular chauffeur. He ran a thumb over the plain cotton, feeling oddly disconnected from the opulent life he'd built. A pang of apprehension tightened his chest. Soon he would be stepping away from everything familiar, at least for a little while. The phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. Victoria. Taking a slow breath, he answered, trying to project a calm he didn't fully feel. "Good morning." "Morning, love," she said, her voice bright. "I'm just calling to confirm. The wedding planner needs you at the Hamptons estate by Wednesday." "That's 2 days from now, right? We're trying to finalize the timeline for the rehearsal dinner." Daniel swallowed. He'd orchestrated a cover story about a last-minute business crisis that would prevent him from arriving until late in the week. "That's the plan, yes. I've got an urgent round of investor meetings I can't miss. But you go ahead, and I'll join you as soon as I'm done." She made a small sound of disappointment. "I understand. I suppose we can't complain about a man who's so dedicated to his career. It's part of what makes you. He forced a light laugh, wishing he could find comfort in her words. "Yeah, that's me. Always working. I'll do my best to wrap up quickly." After a bit more small talk, they ended the call. Daniel exhaled, his heart heavy. He felt a twinge of guilt for lying so seamlessly. But how else could he test what might be happening behind his back? In a way, this was the last act of self-preservation he could cling to. Before leaving his penthouse, he took one final look around. The sleek furniture, the abstract paintings, and the expansive view of Manhattan. This was his fortress, his world. Yet he'd be stepping out of it, symbolically shedding Daniel Matthews and everything that name implied. He locked up the penthouse with a strange sense of finality, as though saying goodbye to more than just his home. Downstairs, the elevator doors slid open to reveal his usual driver, Mark, waiting by the limousine. Daniel approached with a cordial nod. "Mark, I won't be needing the limo today. Take the rest of the week off once you drop me at the office." Mark raised a brow in surprise. "The whole week, sir. Are you sure?" Daniel handed over an envelope with a generous tip. "Yes, I'll be out of the city. Personal business." "You deserve some time off." A hint of a smile crossed the driver's face. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews." Sitting in the back seat, Daniel felt a wave of reluctance. This was one of the last times he would ride in his own limousine before adopting a new identity. The city streets zipped by, full of busy shoppers, tourists snapping pictures, and professionals rushing to their appointments. A pang of nostalgia washed over him. He'd come a long way since his humble beginnings, building a billion-dollar empire that allowed him to travel in style wherever he went. Now, ironically, he would be stepping into the role of the hired help. At the office, he spent the day ensuring operations would run smoothly in his absence. He summoned Carla, who entered with her usual efficient stride. They reviewed pending contracts, the status of current projects, and anything that might require Daniel's personal attention. When they finished, She lingered by the door. "Sir, you still seem restless. I can handle the next few days just fine. Are you absolutely sure there's nothing else we should discuss?" He considered her question carefully. Carla had always been trustworthy, but sharing his plan with more people only increased the risk. He gave her a small shake of his head. "I appreciate your concern, but everything is in place, I promise." She nodded, though apprehension flickered in her eyes. "All right, let me know if you need anything. Good luck with whatever it is you're dealing with." By late afternoon, Daniel left the building with a packed leather duffel bag rather than his usual designer briefcase. He took a taxi, an ordinary yellow cab, not the black luxury car he owned, and directed the driver to a discreet parking garage near the outskirts of Manhattan. There, in a reserved spot, waited a modest sedan arranged by John. Sliding into the driver's seat, Daniel caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. His expression was tense, his eyes reflecting a mixture of anticipation and dread. He pressed the ignition, feeling the engine hum beneath him. This car was far from the sleek machines he was used to, but it suited James Whitley perfectly. Turning onto the highway, Daniel felt the city fade behind him. With each passing mile, he left behind Daniel Matthews, the billionaire tech entrepreneur, and prepared himself for the role of an unassuming chauffeur. His mind buzzed with doubts, but he clenched the wheel, resolved. There was no turning back now. In 2 days, he would enter the Winchester estate not as an honored guest or husband-to-be, but as a simple employee. Part of him wondered if he'd ever truly return to the life he was leaving. 2 days later, a grey sedan rolled up to the gated entrance of a sprawling estate in the Hamptons. The property's tall iron gates were flanked by manicured hedges and a pristine stone wall that spoke of old money. Behind the gates, an elegant circular driveway curved around a central fountain, leading to the main house, a stately mansion of classic white columns and a sweeping veranda. Daniel, now dressed in a plain black suit with no tie, felt a prickle of nerves as he lowered the driver's side window. A security guard leaned forward, scrutinizing him. "Name?" Clearing his throat, Daniel answered, "James Whitley." "I'm here as the new driver for the Winchester party." The guard checked a clipboard. "Yes, Mr. Whitley, you're expected. Please proceed. Park around back where the staff enters." Easing the sedan forward, Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was the moment where all his plans and fears coalesced. Beyond the gate stretched immaculately kept lawns, gardens lined with fresh blooms, and a large stone fountain at the mansion's entrance. He couldn't deny the estate's grandeur, though it felt oddly foreign to him. Normally, if he were arriving as Daniel Matthews, he would have driven in through the main driveway, likely greeted by a butler or house manager. Today, as James Whitley, he was relegated to a back parking area tucked beside the servants' quarters. He found a designated spot near a row of identical black cars, limousines and SUVs awaiting instructions. Exhaling, he turned off the engine. The place was bustling with activity. Catering vans unloaded crates of fresh produce, a team of florists arranged elaborate bouquets on rolling carts, and staff members in crisp uniforms hurried back and forth. Daniel stepped out into the mild Hamptons air, the tang of salt from the distant ocean mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass. He approached a side entrance where a tall woman in her 50s, wearing a neatly pressed navy blazer, stood with a clipboard in hand, directing staff. She glanced at him. "You must be James Whitley. I'm Martha, the house manager. Follow me. We'll get you squared away with your quarters and schedule." He nodded, struggling to mask the air of confidence that naturally accompanied him. "Thank you," he said, forcing a mild tone. They walked down a narrow corridor leading to the staff wing. Sparse walls, bare floors, and muted lighting contrasted sharply with the lush decor he glimpsed through open doors in the main part of the mansion. Eventually, Martha guided him to a small room, a modest cot, a wooden dresser, and a single window overlooking the side garden. "It's not luxurious," she said with a shrug, "but it's where you'll sleep when you're not on duty. You'll mostly be driving Ms. Victoria or running errands for Mr. Charles. Any questions before I show you the rest of the house?" Daniel cleared his throat, carefully lowering his gaze, remembering he was no longer the man who owned penthouse suites and entire floors of office towers. "No, ma'am," he replied, adopting a polite humility. "I appreciate the help." Martha nodded. "Good. We're running a tight schedule. The Winchesters are hosting the first round of guests tomorrow. There's a welcome dinner in 2 days. Rehearsal is the day after. Then the wedding. It'll be a frenzy. Make sure you're always on standby." Following her, Daniel absorbed details of the staff wing, a communal kitchen for quick meals, a small lounge with a couch and a TV, and a locked door that Martha said led to the property's expansive wine cellar. She explained the chain of command. Mr. Charles Winchester outranked everyone, obviously, though Mrs. Victoria took precedence in practical matters for the wedding. Daniel merely nodded, carefully tucking away each piece of information for future reference. As they emerged into the main hallway, Daniel felt a jolt. Standing at the opposite end, engaged in conversation with a cluster of decorators, was Victoria. She wore a fitted ivory blouse and elegant beige slacks, her hair pulled into a sleek chignon. Even from a distance, she radiated poise, yet he noticed a certain edge in her posture he hadn't seen in the city. He ducked back slightly, avoiding direct eye contact. Part of him ached to call out her name, to test if she would recognize him beneath his understated disguise. But reason prevailed. He simply couldn't risk it yet. Martha didn't notice his reaction. She pointed to a hallway leading off to the right. "Service quarters, laundry, and staff lounge are that way. You'll meet some of the house staff there. Just be sure to keep track of your daily schedule. We don't accept tardiness or confusion here." Under normal circumstances, Daniel would have found her tone abrupt, but he merely nodded again. "Understood. Thank you." She handed him a typed schedule, complete with assigned times to drive Miss Victoria around the estate, pick up certain guests from the nearby heliport, and run errands in town. Most entries listed James Whitley as the designated driver. Ironically, that name on paper made his heart twist with both amusement and apprehension. After thanking Martha, he retreated to his room to settle in. The modest space felt confining, a clear step down from his penthouse or even a standard hotel suite. A small mirror hung on the wall. He studied his reflection, hair gelled a bit differently, no designer watch, no tailored suit. In this environment, it was surprisingly easy to vanish into the background. He took a moment to consider how drastically his life had pivoted. Here, in the Hamptons, on the brink of what should have been his wedding celebration, he was instead a stranger among staff. The rules had changed. He was no longer the master of the house, free to stroll into any room or ask any question. He was the help, expected to remain unobtrusive and obedient. As he prepared for the days ahead, Daniel braced himself for the new reality he'd chosen, a path that could either confirm or shatter everything he believed about the woman he was planning to marry. Seated on the edge of his narrow bed, Daniel was running through the daily schedule Martha had handed him when a light knock sounded on the open door. He looked up to see a young man in his mid-20s with sandy brown hair, wearing the same standardized staff attire as everyone else. Black slacks, a white button-down shirt. The newcomer held a friendly grin. "Hey there, I'm Rick," the man said, stepping inside. "I drive the other sedan, mostly for Mr. Charles. Heard you just arrived." Daniel nodded, discreetly clearing his throat. "James," he replied, using his assumed name. "Nice to meet you." Rick motioned to the schedule in Daniel's hand. Pretty daunting at first, huh? This place runs like a machine, especially during big events. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Appreciating the man's open demeanor, Daniel offered a small smile. Thanks, it's my first time working for a family this prominent. Any tips? The corners of Rick's eyes crinkled in sympathy. Just keep your head down, do as you're told, and don't linger around the family's private conversations. Mr. Charles is intense, and Ms. Victoria, well, she can be demanding, but we're used to it. The real challenge is dealing with the wave of relatives who start showing up. Daniel stored that away as a mental note. I appreciate the heads up. Rick gestured for him to follow. Come on, let's get some coffee in the staff lounge before the real chaos begins. As Daniel stepped into the lounge, he noticed a handful of staff members chatting quietly at a small table. A middle-aged cook with flour on her apron sipped tea, while a young woman in a maid's uniform thumbed nervously through a grocery list. A low murmur of conversation filled the space, tinged with that familiar vibe of busy people snatching a rare moment of rest. The cook, who introduced herself as Clara, gave Daniel an assessing look over the rim of her teacup. So, you're the new driver, huh? Bet you'll have your hands full with Miss Victoria. She has a routine for every single day. She'll want to go shopping or visit the yacht club. Then she'll change her mind and demand the car for something else. Keep your gas tank full at all times. Daniel chuckled softly. Duly noted. Rick poured coffee into a paper cup and passed it to Daniel. Trust me, you want to keep a little caffeine in your system. The Winchesters can go all day, especially with the wedding coming up. Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm cup, feeling grateful for the simple camaraderie. He asked, so it's just the two of us on the driving team? Rick shrugged. Yeah, for now. There's a limo service on call, but it's mostly us who shuttle everyone around. Works fine unless some cousin or auntie shows up unannounced. He rolled his eyes with a grin that suggested it happened more often than not. Observing the group, Daniel felt a growing sense of empathy for these people who kept the Winchester estate running smoothly. They weren't just faceless employees. They had personalities, concerns, a certain pride in their work. He realized he had rarely connected with staff on this level. He'd always been polite, but distant. Now, forced to blend in as one of them, he found himself noticing the small, human details of their everyday lives. Not long after, Martha's voice echoed down the corridor, summoning everyone to their posts. Daniel quickly drained the last of his coffee and followed Rick out. Together, they passed through the kitchen, where the clang of pots and pans mixed with the mouth-watering aroma of fresh basil and simmering sauces. Caterers bustled about, preparing for a gathering later that evening, apparently a small welcome party for out-of-town relatives. As Daniel moved through the halls, he kept an eye out for Victoria, careful not to cross paths with her unless absolutely necessary. When at last he heard her voice drifting through an open door, he ducked behind a large decorative pillar, waiting until she moved on. It felt strange and thrilling to skulk in shadows in his own fiancée's home. He couldn't deny the pinch in his chest whenever he caught a glimpse of her, talking and laughing, reminding him of the life they'd shared back in Manhattan, dinners at upscale restaurants, cozy nights in his penthouse. That life seemed so distant now. Eventually, he returned to the staff area, referencing the schedule for his first official task, picking up some extended family members at the local train station. Before heading off, he double-checked his driver's kit, a notepad with instructions, a discreet earpiece for radio communication, and the keys to one of the black sedans. Rick gave him a thumbs up for luck. Roughly 20 minutes later, Daniel started the car and pulled onto the coastal highway, the ocean breeze drifting in through the slightly open window. Adapting to the staff routine wasn't as straightforward as he'd assumed, but he found a quiet determination in himself. He'd come here for answers, And the first step was blending in seamlessly, making sure no one suspected his real identity. Despite the gravity of his mission, a small part of him relished the chance to experience this world from a completely different vantage point. On Daniel's second full day at the estate, the rhythms of the staff began to feel familiar. He woke early, changed into the standard black slacks and collared shirt, and reported to the garage. His morning was spent chauffeuring a distant uncle to a nearby marina where he was meeting a yacht broker. Then he drove an elderly aunt to an upscale boutique in Southampton, listening to her complain about the humidity the entire way. By mid-afternoon, he returned to the staff lounge, sweating slightly beneath his neatly pressed shirt. As he refilled his water bottle from a cooler in the corner, the door swung open and a woman stepped inside. She wore a simple floral sundress, her posture uncertain, as though she didn't quite belong in either the main house or the staff wing. Her eyes landed on Daniel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Sorry," she said softly. "I was just looking for the kitchen. I'm Rachel Winchester." Daniel's pulse quickened. He recognized her name. Rachel was Victoria's cousin, the one who rarely appeared in society magazines and was rumored to be something of a black sheep in the family. She seemed younger than Victoria, probably around 30, with expressive hazel eyes and wavy brown hair. Unlike Victoria's meticulously polished style, Rachel had a gentle, almost bohemian grace about her. He forced a polite nod, remembering his role. "Hello, Ms. Winchester." "I'm James, one of the drivers. The kitchen is just down the hall, third door on the left." Rachel's cheeks tinted pink. "Right, thanks. I must have taken a wrong turn." She paused, studying him for a beat. "I haven't seen you around before. Did you just start working here?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, keeping his tone subdued. "I'm new." She gave him a sympathetic smile. "Well, welcome to the chaos. These family gatherings get pretty intense." He didn't know how to respond without sounding suspicious, so he simply nodded. Rachel turned to leave, then hesitated. "Actually, do you happen to know if there's a space where I can paint? I'm an artist. Sometimes, in the middle of all the noise, I need a quiet corner." Daniel thought quickly. Martha had mentioned an older carriage house near the edge of the property, used mostly for storage. "There's a carriage house outside the west garden. Might be empty enough for you." Rachel's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, James, really." She stepped out, leaving Daniel in the lounge, water bottle in hand. He stared at the closed door, an unexpected warmth in his chest. Rachel's demeanor contrasted sharply with the rest of the Winchesters he'd met. No haughtiness, no thinly veiled demands. He recalled old rumors that she'd stepped away from the family's real estate business to pursue art full-time. Because of that, relatives had labeled her impractical. If that were the case, Daniel suspected she'd be the only Winchester who might treat him, a lowly driver like a human being. Later, as he parked the sedan by the back entrance, Clara the cook spotted him and waved him over. "We could use some help carrying groceries," she said. "Big dinner planned for tonight." He followed her to a delivery van, hauling boxes of produce. Another staffer, Mark the gardener, joined them. While placing crates of lettuce and tomatoes on a wheeled cart, Clara muttered, "I wish these Winchesters could stick to a menu. They keep changing their minds. Last night I was told to prepare a Mediterranean spread. Now they say they want a New England seafood feast." Mark chuckled. "Keeps us on our toes, eh?" Daniel offered a small smile, but his thoughts drifted to Rachel. She'd seemed out of place in her own family's estate. He wondered if she was truly the anomaly within the Winchesters, someone who valued genuine connections and creative pursuits over money and power. It was a stark reminder that no family was entirely one thing. As the afternoon wore on, Daniel prepared to drive Victoria into town. According to the schedule, She wanted to visit the local spa, followed by a private fitting at a bridal boutique. Heart pounding, he steeled himself to maintain composure in close quarters with his fiancée, all while pretending to be a stranger. She emerged from the house wearing a chic lavender blouse, her blonde hair in a sleek ponytail. Sliding into the back seat, she hardly glanced at Daniel, absorbed in her phone. "The spa is on East Main. Take the scenic route, please. I need a bit of air before dealing with that place," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied quietly. Pulling away, he caught a glimpse of Victoria in the rearview mirror. She looked beautiful, but her expression was tense, almost annoyed. The tension wasn't directed at him specifically. She barely acknowledged his presence. That realization cut deeper than he expected. They drove in near silence. As the sedan wound through picturesque streets lined with oak trees and quaint shops, Daniel recalled earlier, happier drives with Victoria. Back in Manhattan, they'd share jokes or plan their future over lattes in the car. Now, she was a distant passenger, preoccupied with text messages and notifications. He felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. If she could so easily disregard him now, perhaps it meant she was truly different behind closed doors. Upon reaching the spa, Victoria glanced up. "Wait here," she said curtly, exiting with her handbag in tow. As Daniel watched her disappear inside, he couldn't help but think about Rachel's gentle concern, the staff's camaraderie, and the swirl of secrets he was on the verge of uncovering. Surrounded by potential foes, he realized that allies might be found in the most unlikely corners of this lavish estate. But he also knew that forging any true connection under a false identity was a precarious venture. Later that evening, the mansion buzzed with rising energy. Extended family members, business associates, and close friends converged in the ornate foyer for a semi-formal gathering. Daniel, dressed in the same plain black suit, stood near the front entrance, keys in hand, ready to drive anyone who needed transportation. He watched the arrivals from a discreet distance, reminding himself that he was supposed to be invisible. Suddenly, Charles Winchester's booming voice cut through the lively chatter. "Where is that new driver? James, is he here?" Daniel stepped forward, heart pounding. "Yes, sir." Charles beckoned him with an impatient wave. "Come with me. I need you to run an errand." He followed Charles down a hallway into a small side room that functioned as a private study. The decor was a study in opulence. Mahogany bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, dark green walls illuminated by a chandelier overhead. Charles rifled through a desk drawer, pulling out a slim envelope. "Take this to the address listed on the front. It's a property agent's office down in East Hampton. Tell them it's from Charles Winchester and bring back any paperwork they give you." "Understood?" Daniel sensed something guarded in Charles's eyes, a glint that hinted at secrecy. He nodded. "Yes, sir, right away." As he turned to leave, Charles cleared his throat. "And, James, a word of caution. This is confidential business. Don't go snooping around or you'll find yourself out of a job. Understood?" The challenge in Charles's stare felt like a dare. Daniel bowed his head slightly. "Understood, Mr. Winchester." He left the house through the staff entrance, envelope tucked safely in his inside pocket. The night air was cool against his face. While it could be a mundane real estate transaction, the clandestine nature piqued his suspicion. Perhaps this would lead him to the first concrete evidence of the Winchesters' plan to manipulate his, or rather, Daniel Matthews' corporate assets. He started the sedan and headed down the long driveway. Once on the main road, he flipped on the interior light briefly to glance at the envelope's front. No name, just an address. The distinct handwriting looked more like a scrawl than elegant script. He considered opening it, but doing so risked leaving signs that could raise suspicion. He'd have to be more careful. After a 20-minute drive under starlit skies, he arrived at a modest office building. Most suites were dark, but one on the ground floor glowed with fluorescent light. The glass door bore a painted sign, "Long Island Coastal Properties." Daniel entered, finding a lone receptionist behind a cluttered desk. She looked up, blinking with mild surprise. "May I help you?" "I'm delivering this, from Charles Winchester." He set the envelope before her. Her eyes flicked from him to the envelope. "Wait a moment." Slipping into a back office, she left Daniel alone in the reception area. He scanned the walls. Pictures of beach houses, farmland, and new developments covered the bulletin boards. A few real estate brochures were spread out on a coffee table. Moments later, the receptionist returned, carrying a sealed folder. "You're to take this back. And Mr. Winchester said you should give him this." She handed Daniel a handwritten note on stationery. Daniel tucked everything under his arm. "Thank you. Have a good night." On the drive back, curiosity gnawed at him. What if these documents contained something about his own properties or shares? He fought the urge to pull over and inspect them. If he risked it and Charles found any sign of tampering, Daniel's entire plan could collapse. Better to keep his cover intact a little longer. Finally, he reached the estate, slipping in through the staff entrance. The house remained in full swing, with guests mingling in the lavish sitting rooms. Carefully, he sought out Charles, who stood by an ornate fireplace, whiskey glass in hand, talking to an older gentleman in a tuxedo. Charles broke off his conversation, turning to Daniel with a faintly challenging expression. "Good, you're back. Give me the folder." Daniel handed it over, along with the note. Charles pocketed the note, then tossed a quick glance through the top pages, nodding in satisfaction. "All right, James, that's all for tonight. Go get some rest, or help the kitchen if they need a hand. Don't go wandering." "Yes, sir," Daniel said. He turned and left, heart racing. He was sure that the contents of that folder were significant, maybe a contract or deed, but for now it was out of reach. This was the first real test Charles had thrown his way, and Daniel had followed the man's instructions to the letter without giving himself away. He found refuge in the back corridors, eventually making his way to the staff lounge. Rick was there, finishing a late dinner while Clara dried some dishes by a small sink. They greeted him with cordial nods. "Errand run for Mr. Winchester?" Rick asked, raising an eyebrow. "He does that sometimes, likes to test the new staff." Daniel forced a shrug. "I guess I passed." Clara smirked. "Charles doesn't care about passing or failing. He just wants to see if you'll talk too much or ask the wrong questions. That's how he roots out potential troublemakers." A prickle of unease ran through Daniel. He realized that he was indeed a troublemaker in Charles's eyes. If only the man knew. He was here under false pretenses, ready to expose any shady dealings. For now, though, he was just an obedient driver named James Whitley, blending into the household. As the night wore on, Daniel returned to his small room, determined to gather more proof. This was only the beginning. He might have succeeded in his first test, but he sensed that bigger challenges and more dangerous confrontations lay ahead. If he wanted the truth, he needed to tread carefully, watching and listening for any slip of information that could confirm his suspicions. He closed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him. The plan was unfolding, and if he could endure these early trials, perhaps he would finally uncover whether the woman he'd almost married was truly everything she seemed, or if, deep down, she and her family had orchestrated a masterful deception. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself in an endless cycle of early mornings and late nights. As James Whitley, he fetched guests from the train station, delivered them to the estate, then shuttled them around the Hamptons on a whim. The flow of people, cousins, Uncles, close friends, and business associates grew larger by the hour. Their names and faces blurred together, but their conversations offered glimpses into the intricate world of the Winchesters. One afternoon, while waiting outside the mansion, Daniel overheard a pair of guests on the veranda chatting about Victoria's upcoming wedding. A middle-aged woman in a chic summer dress was telling a bald gentleman in a linen suit that this union could give the Winchesters the leverage they need to expand their real estate empire into new territory. She spoke as if Daniel, standing quietly by the car, didn't exist. He clenched the steering wheel, forcing himself to remain impassive. Each passing comment reinforced the idea that this marriage was more of a business maneuver than a love match. More than once, he questioned whether his mission as James was actually necessary. It seemed the truth about the Winchesters' ambitions was hiding in plain sight, if one only bothered to look. Yet, not everyone carried that same ruthless aura. Daniel drove Rachel a few times, mostly to local art galleries or secluded spots along the beach where she liked to paint sunsets and ocean views. She often sat beside him in the front seat, ignoring the typical arrangement where employers ride in the back. She was always kind, asking about his day or offering him coffee. It gave him a strange sense of normalcy in an otherwise tense environment. "So, James," she said one afternoon, gently sipping from a to-go cup, "do you ever feel overwhelmed by all this?" She waved a hand toward the passing coastline, the sprawling wealth and extravagance that dominated the Hamptons. He weighed his words carefully. "I've worked around wealthy families before, but the Winchesters, they seem different." Rachel frowned. "They definitely are. On one hand, they're powerful, generous with charities sometimes, and they know how to host grand gatherings. But on the other, there's a strict hierarchy." She glanced at him. "Staff are treated kindly as long as they stay in their place. And if you're part of the family but don't fit the mold, like me, it can be stifling." He caught a note of pain in her voice. Rachel had hinted before that she'd chosen a different path, pursuing art instead of diving into the family business, and was often sidelined for it. He felt an unexpected connection to her sense of displacement. Here he was, a man who should have been the guest of honor in this mansion, now relegated to the role of an outsider. In a way, he and Rachel existed on the fringes of the Winchester world, each for different reasons. When they got back, she offered a kind smile and said, "Thanks for driving me. If you ever need a breather, you're welcome to watch me paint in the carriage house." "It's quiet there." He appreciated the invitation, but declined politely, knowing he had to remain vigilant. These cordial interactions felt like small victories, moments of genuine human connection in a place where power games ruled the day. Later that same evening, Daniel found himself escorting Victoria and 3 of her closest friends to a private yacht party. The women were dressed in elegant cocktail attire, talking animatedly about the big day, now only a handful of days away. Once again, he was invisible, James the driver. He couldn't help noticing how Victoria's voice changed when she was around her friends. She spoke confidently, yes, but there was a sharpness he hadn't fully recognized before. She gloated about the wedding details, praising her father's business maneuvers in real estate. At one point, she even joked about how clueless men could be when it came to corporate matters, which drew a round of laughter from her companions. Daniel felt an uneasy knot tighten in his stomach. Dropping them off at the marina, he watched them board a sleek yacht, clinking champagne glasses as they disappeared into the cabin. He wondered if, in private, she mocked him too, her supposedly adoring fiancé, oblivious to the possibility that this marriage was just another cog in the Winchester machine. Returning to the mansion alone, Daniel took a moment to catch his breath in the staff lounge. Clara, the cook, was finishing her shift, and Rick, the other driver, was flipping through channels on the small TV. It was tempting to confide in them, good, hard-working people who might suspect there was more to the Winchesters than met the eye, but Daniel knew better than to jeopardize his cover. Instead, he headed to his room, reflecting on all the subtle clues he had gathered. The family's circle of acquaintances seemed keenly aware that the wedding would strengthen the Winchesters' clout. Victoria behaved one way with staff, another way with her socialite friends, and yet another in public, showing a carefully crafted facade. Rachel stood apart from it all, gentle and genuine, offering glimpses of what normalcy might look like if he weren't tangled in secrecy. He realized that each day brought a fresh test. Would he maintain his composure, or would his frustration boil over? Would he uncover more evidence of corporate meddling, or miss the chance because he had to play the role of a compliant employee? The tension weighed on him like a heavy cloak. Yet beneath that anxiety lay an awakening clarity. The closer he got, the more convinced he became that the Winchesters were up to something nefarious. The challenge now was gathering proof solid enough to confront them, and deciding how long he could bear to remain hidden in plain sight. Late in the afternoon, Daniel noticed an unfamiliar car pull up to the estate, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. Two men in dark suits emerged, their demeanor brisk and businesslike. They were greeted by Charles himself, who led them into the house with the efficient courtesy one extends to valued associates. Sensing something significant, Daniel hovered near the garage, engine idling as he pretended to check fluid levels. About an hour later, the men returned, accompanied by Charles and Victoria. They paused on the steps for a moment, conversing in hushed tones. Daniel crept closer, standing behind a tall hedge. He caught snippets of conversation, mentions of shares, merger, post-nuptial adjustments, and legal strategies. His pulse sped up. This was precisely the kind of conversation he suspected might be happening all along. The blueprint for taking control of his company's stock once he and Victoria were legally bound. As the men departed, Victoria glanced around, her eyes sweeping the grounds. For a heart-pounding second, Daniel feared she might spot him, but her gaze slid past him without registering his presence. She turned to Charles, who placed a hand on her shoulder and gave her a tight-lipped nod. They strode back inside, leaving Daniel to process what he'd overheard. He longed to see the actual documents or catch more details, but he was in too vulnerable a position to risk it. Maintaining his disguise required careful self-restraint. Still, the overheard fragments fueled his anger and confirmed his worst suspicions. His wedding was, at least for the Winchesters, not a romantic union, but a tactical step toward a corporate takeover. Weighed down by these revelations, he spent the rest of the evening in a quiet fog, driving a few latecomers from the train station to the estate. His mind churned with questions. Should he confront Victoria now? Could there be a misunderstanding? Part of him resisted the idea that the woman he once loved, still loved, in some corners of his heart, could be orchestrating such treachery. But the mounting evidence told a grim story. His internal conflict only grew when Rachel asked him, as James, to give her a ride to a small art supply store in a nearby town. He agreed, driving along winding roads that cut through the Hamptons' picturesque scenery. Halfway there, she glanced at him curiously, noticing his quiet tension. "James, you've been different lately," she said softly. "You always seemed thoughtful, but these past few days, you look burdened. Is the wedding chaos getting to you?" He stared straight ahead, uncertain how to reply. She saw more than he'd expected. Her kindness made her perceptive. "It's a lot to take in, that's all." Rachel paused. "I get it. This family can be intense. If you ever need someone to listen, I'm around. I don't quite fit the mold either. We could bond over that." Daniel risked a brief glance in her direction. She wore a gentle expression that reminded him of the empathy he'd always craved in his relationships. For a fleeting moment, he was tempted to reveal everything, to confess that his real name wasn't James, that he was the fiancé her cousin planned to marry in a matter of days. But the notion vanished almost as soon as it appeared. The risks were too high, and Rachel had enough problems without being pulled into his deception. When they arrived at the store, Rachel hopped out, offering a warm smile. "Thanks again, I'll be quick." He waited, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of what he'd just denied himself. Though he recognized the necessity of his secret, it pained him to withhold the truth from the one person in the Winchester orbit who might actually care about his well-being. That night, after dropping Rachel off, he slipped into the staff wing, physically drained and emotionally conflicted. While preparing to turn in, he received a text message on the burner phone from John. "Any new findings? Need to decide if we involve legal." He replied with cautious details, typing slowly. "Still gathering info. Heard talk of post-nuptial deals. Will try to confirm." A minute later, John responded, "Careful. Don't push too hard or get caught." "Keep me updated." Daniel tucked the phone under his pillow, wishing he could teleport out of this twisted situation. He felt torn between extremes. On one side, the urge to preserve the wedding facade, in case there was some chance that Victoria's motives weren't as dark as they seemed. On the other, a burning desire to expose everything, no matter the fallout. Each day that passed only deepened the chasm in his heart. In the silence of his cramped room, he recognized that the moral weight of his own deception was wearing him down, but he had no choice. The lines between love, loyalty, and self-preservation were blurred beyond recognition. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling's faint shadows, knowing he was hurtling toward a moment when he'd have to choose between continuing the lie or facing the painful truth head-on. Dawn brought the sound of heavy rain drumming against the windows. The estate, usually vibrant with staff activity, felt subdued under grey skies. Daniel, already awake, stared at the droplets sliding down the glass. Tension coiled in his chest. With the wedding only days away, he sensed a confrontation was imminent. His first task of the morning was to drive Charles into town for an early meeting. They rode in silence at first. Charles, reading something on his tablet, exuded an air of self-satisfaction, yet Daniel felt the older man's gaze flick toward him occasionally, as though trying to read him. When they reached their destination, a discreet office building near the harbor, Charles hesitated before stepping out of the sedan. "Wait here," he said curtly. "I shouldn't be too long." Daniel watched through the windshield as Charles disappeared inside. The building bore no sign or company name, only a small plaque by the door with initials that could have stood for a law firm or a private consultancy. He noted the address carefully, filing it away. Minutes ticked by. The rain continued to pelt the roof. Daniel was lost in thought when a tap on the passenger side window startled him. Glancing over, he saw a soaked Victoria holding an umbrella. Her hair was damp at the edges. She opened the door and slid into the front seat with an exasperated sigh. "James, right?" she asked, as though she barely remembered his name. He nodded. "Yes, Ms. Winchester. Everything all right?" She gave him a tight smile. "It's just... Dad told me he was coming here. I guess our schedules overlapped. We need to go over wedding details once he's done. Might as well wait in the car." He cleared his throat, willing himself to remain calm, despite the fact that he was mere inches from his fiancée. Up close, he noticed the details he used to admire. The subtle perfume she wore, the shape of her eyes. His heart twisted at the memory of how those eyes once looked at him with apparent affection. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victoria started tidying her hair in the visor mirror. "So, James, how are you finding your time here, settling in?" Her tone was cordial, but distant. He kept his voice even. "Yes, ma'am. It's been busy, but the staff is helpful." She flipped the visor back up, letting out a small sigh. "Busy is right. We're juggling a million things. Between you and me—" She paused, as though considering whether to divulge more. "Never mind. It's complicated." Daniel's pulse quickened. What had she been about to say? Was there a hint of genuine stress in her expression? "I can imagine a wedding of this scale can be overwhelming." She nodded, glancing toward the building's entrance as if checking to see if Charles might appear. "Overwhelming doesn't cover it. My father has specific plans, and I have my own ideas. Plus, there's Daniel's company to consider." Her lips twitched at the corners, something between a smirk and uncertainty. "I guess I shouldn't be venting to you about this, but I need to talk to someone who isn't embroiled in the family dynamics." Despite the cautious words, he felt a tiny pang of sympathy. She seemed genuinely frazzled, not entirely the cold manipulator he had witnessed in glimpses. Was it possible that she was trapped under her father's ambitions? Or was she simply playing another role? "I'm here if you need me," he offered quietly, the statement sounding far more personal than he intended. Victoria turned to face him, an odd flicker crossing her eyes. "Thank you," she said, almost softly, before reverting to her guarded stance. Just then, Charles emerged, hurrying under the shelter of his umbrella. He caught sight of Victoria in the front seat, and something in his expression darkened. Opening the back door, he slid in, effectively ending their conversation. "Didn't realize you were coming, Victoria," he said, voice clipped. She shrugged, maintaining her composure. "We have arrangements to discuss. I thought I'd catch you here." Charles gave a curt nod. "Fine, let's go, James. Back to the estate." As Daniel pulled away from the curb, he felt the tension emanating from the back seat. Father and daughter exchanged glances that hinted at unspoken disagreements. He listened carefully, hoping to catch a stray comment that might reveal more about their plans, but both remained tight-lipped. After returning them to the mansion, Daniel watched as they disappeared inside, talking in hushed voices. He couldn't help but feel a measure of sympathy for Victoria, even if she was indeed part of this cunning scheme. Perhaps she was under more pressure than he'd realized. Then again, pity for her didn't erase the fact that she seemed fully invested in controlling his assets once the wedding took place. His chest felt heavy as he parked the sedan. If Victoria herself had doubts or regrets, she hadn't yet acted on them. Daniel understood he was running out of time to secure real evidence. Charles's suspicious meetings, the mention of shares, the occasional slip from Victoria's lips, everything pointed to an imminent power grab, but a plan that momentous had to leave a paper trail. Right? If he could just find it before the wedding day, maybe he could prevent what now felt like an inevitable disaster. Late that night, after most of the guests and family members had retired to their rooms, Daniel ventured out of the staff quarters. A hunch led him to the library, a large, wood-paneled room at the far end of the mansion, seldom used by anyone except Charles for his private phone calls. Its imposing shelves and antique furniture exuded old-world charm. But the space often lay silent unless Charles decided to host a small meeting or retreat there for scotch and business calls. Cautiously, Daniel slipped inside, heart pounding with every step on the thick Persian rug. A dim lamp cast long shadows across the shelves. He scanned the room, noting a massive oak desk near the far wall. If Charles kept sensitive documents anywhere, it might be here, locked in drawers or hidden in plain sight among financial ledgers. A twinge of guilt stabbed Daniel. He hated prying like a common spy, but the stakes were too high. He crept to the desk, trying each drawer. One was locked. He knelt down, rummaging his pocket for a small metal pick he'd tucked away weeks ago in anticipation of such a moment. His heart thudded as he coaxed the lock, the faint metallic clicks echoing unnervingly in the silence. After several nerve-wracking seconds, the drawer slid open. Inside lay folders, some labeled with cryptic initials, others with property addresses in Manhattan or the Hamptons. Leafing through them quickly, he spotted references to corporate shares. His own company's ticker symbol leapt out at him. The scribbled notes suggested a plan to alter certain board member positions right after the wedding, giving VW, Victoria Winchester, immediate influence. Another line read, "Transfer of controlling interest to be executed within 30 days, post-nuptial." A wave of nausea hit him. The plan was explicit. The moment Daniel and Victoria were married, she would have the legal foothold to shift the balance of power in his company, aided by her father's real estate clout and possibly third-party investors. His breath caught at the stark betrayal. A sudden shuffle in the hallway froze him. Light footsteps approached. Instinctively, Daniel snapped the folder shut and ducked behind the desk. The door creaked open. He heard a woman's voice, soft and confused. "Dad? Are you in here?" Recognizing Victoria's tone, Daniel held his breath, pressing himself against the side of the desk. The sound of her heels clicked against the floor as she moved further into the room. From his hiding spot, he caught a sliver of her figure in the lamp's glow, silky nightgown, a thin robe pulled around her shoulders. She paused, scanning the silent library. Weird. "I could have sworn I heard something." Daniel stayed absolutely still, adrenaline roaring in his ears. After a tense moment, Victoria sighed and retreated, flipping off the lamp before she exited. Darkness enveloped the library, and he remained crouched for several seconds, heart hammering painfully. When he was sure she'd gone, he exhaled shakily. Slipping the folder back into the drawer, he locked it as best he could and crept out of the room, hugging the shadows until he returned to the staff wing. Once safely behind the closed door of his small room, he sank onto the bed, documents still swirling in his mind. This was the proof he needed, clear evidence that his company was under threat from the moment he said, "I do." Yet the emotional blow was just as devastating. Here was confirmation that his fiancée planned to undermine him, possibly with her father's full support. He fished out the burner phone, firing off a quick message to John. "Found documents. Confirmed takeover plan. They want post-nup to shift board control. Will attempt to get copies." John's reply came swiftly. "We have enough to cancel wedding or confront them. Your call. Be safe." Daniel rubbed his temples, overwhelmed by the decision looming before him. One path meant coming clean and exposing the plot, inviting a massive scandal, lawsuits, and irrevocable damage to both families' reputations. The other path meant quietly stepping away or letting the wedding proceed, which seemed unthinkable. Could he walk down the aisle knowing these intentions? The thought churned his stomach. He also considered Rachel, unaware of the scheme. She was possibly the only decent soul in this entire fiasco. If the scandal erupted, she would be caught in the fallout, ostracized by her own family, forced to pick a side. The notion pained him more than he expected, given their relative short acquaintance. Pressed between these dilemmas, he realized there was no simple way out. The wedding was just around the corner, and the magnitude of the Winchesters' plan weighed heavily on him. He understood that the next step would be critical. Either he found a discreet way to challenge them, or he revealed everything, come what may. A faint glimmer of hope told him there had to be a line, even for Victoria, that she wouldn't cross. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Staring at the ceiling, Daniel thought of the times he had truly believed in her love. All those tender moments, playful jokes, sweet embraces, had they been nothing more than illusions? The folder's revelations told him that if there had ever been genuine love, it had been overshadowed by greed and strategy. The truth was out, and it was ugly. He closed his eyes, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions spinning inside him. If he let despair consume him, he would lose the focus needed to protect his company and spare himself from a doomed marriage. Tomorrow, he vowed, he would determine his next move, no matter the cost. Sunlight streamed through the small window at dawn, rousing Daniel from a fitful sleep. He stretched stiff muscles, reflecting on the night's revelations. He'd uncovered precisely what he feared, a blueprint for betrayal. In less than a week, he was supposed to stand at the altar with Victoria, pledging lifelong devotion. But how could he do that now? Washing up, he slipped into his chauffeur's uniform, an ironic reminder of the double life he was leading. Before he headed to the garage, he glanced at his phone. No new messages from John. The ball was in Daniel's court. He needed to decide if and how to confront the Winchesters. In the staff corridor, he ran into Rick, who was gulping coffee before tackling the day's tasks. Rick gave him a tired smile. "Morning, James. Crazy day ahead, huh? We've got a wedding rehearsal tomorrow and more guests arriving." "Honestly, I don't know how you keep so calm with all this chaos." Daniel mustered a quiet chuckle. "Lots of practice, I guess. You handling it okay?" Rick shrugged. "Sure, as well as anyone can in this place. It's a job." He lowered his voice, glancing around. "But between you and me, I'll be relieved when this wedding's done. The atmosphere here, it's tense, you know?" Daniel nodded, well aware of the tension. More was at stake than Rick could imagine. Stepping outside, he found the sky bright and clear, the rain having washed the air clean. Yet inside the mansion, a storm brewed, one that Daniel knew would break soon. His first assignment was to drive Charles and Victoria to a luxury bridal shop in town. They emerged from the house in conversation, their tones hushed. Daniel noticed Victoria's brow creased with concern, while Charles seemed to be in lecture mode, gesticulating as he spoke. Daniel opened the car door for them, settling them into the back seat. They hardly acknowledged him, continuing their discussion in low voices. Fragments of phrases reached his ears. Timing, assets, must finalize. Daniel can't suspect. Daniel's jaw clenched, but he kept his face impassive, eyes on the road. It was a surreal moment, chauffeuring his fiancée and her father as they openly plotted to ensure he remained clueless. Midway through the drive, Charles ended a phone call and turned to Victoria. "I'll meet those investors tomorrow, but we need to be sure the wedding goes smoothly. I don't want any last-minute surprises." Victoria let out a frustrated sigh. "Yes, Dad, I know. We've come this far, so let's just keep things on track." She drummed her manicured nails on the seat, then muttered, "I'm not heartless, you know. This isn't easy for me." Charles snorted. "No one said you're heartless, but we have goals. Sentiment can't derail us now. If you want to help your family, you'll do what's necessary." Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. He forced his gaze to remain on the road, though his mind raged. So, Victoria was in turmoil about this, yet her father's words suggested that, torn or not, she was still aligned with the plan. They arrived at the boutique, where Charles stepped out with purposeful urgency. Victoria lingered a moment, meeting Daniel's gaze in the rearview mirror almost by accident. She quickly looked away, stepping onto the sidewalk. The irony seared him. He was right there, invisible behind the facade of James Whitley, listening to the orchestrations of his own betrayal. Back at the estate, Daniel had a brief lull. He retreated to the carriage house's quiet area, hoping to steel his nerves. The wide-open doors let sunlight spill across old wooden beams and leftover crates. To his surprise, Rachel stood in the middle of the space, painting a large canvas. Soft classical music played from a small portable speaker. "Oh, James, hi!" She set down her brush. wiping her hands on a rag. "I thought nobody came here." "Apologies for intruding," Daniel said gently. "I just needed a break from the main house." She smiled understandingly. "I don't blame you. It's madness in there. Care to sit?" She pointed to a makeshift stool near the corner. He accepted, letting out a weary sigh. The carriage house smelled faintly of turpentine and fresh paint, a welcome departure from the mansion's perpetual swirl of perfume and cologne. Rachel studied him with concern. "I know we don't know each other well, but you look troubled." Daniel considered how to respond. He admired her compassionate nature, but couldn't reveal his true identity or everything he'd discovered. "Just feeling the weight of everyone's expectations, I suppose. I'm used to a simpler life." She gave a sympathetic nod. "It can be suffocating around here. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one who sees the cost of all this, emotionally, morally." She paused, her expression distant. "I wish there was something I could do." Her words sparked a glimmer of an idea. Perhaps Rachel, with her softer heart, might help him find a resolution that didn't end in a destructive public scandal. But caution pulsed through him. He couldn't risk dragging her into a mess that might upend her life. Still, her gentle presence reminded him that not all Winchesters were alike. She was living proof that kindness could sprout in the shadow of ambition. He stood, nodding in gratitude. "Thank you, Rachel. This helped more than you know." As he walked away, the weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter, but he remained painfully aware that the real storm was about to break. He carried within him the knowledge of the Winchesters' plotting, evidence enough to spark a massive confrontation. One way or another, the next move would set the stage for the final confrontation that loomed closer with each passing hour. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the unease that had been mounting in Daniel's chest for days. The forecast predicted a storm rolling across the Hamptons coastline, an omen that seemed to mirror the tumult in his life. He stood by one of the mansion's side entrances, dressed in his driver's uniform, staring up at the churning grey clouds. Tomorrow, the wedding rehearsal would begin in earnest, and the ceremony itself was set to follow soon after. Time was running out. Inside, the house buzzed with frenetic energy. Caterers and florists darted through hallways, finalizing details for the big events. Distant relatives roamed the mansion, exclaiming at the opulent decor or chatting about the power couple soon to be wed. The tension behind each polite smile was almost palpable. Now that Daniel had uncovered the family's scheme, every idle comment about the wedding felt like a twisted charade. Late that morning, as he readied the sedan for another round of errands, Charles Winchester appeared, briskly descending the mansion steps. He gestured for Daniel to get behind the wheel. "We have a meeting," Charles said curtly, sliding into the back seat. His stern expression did not bode well. They drove for nearly 30 minutes, arriving at a country club perched near a private golf course. The rolling greens extended into the horizon. Charles told Daniel to stay close, then disappeared inside a modern glass-walled building. Sensing that Charles's meeting might be key to the finalization of his corporate takeover plan, Daniel waited in the car for a while before deciding to take a risk. He noticed a smaller service entrance on the side of the building. With Charles presumably occupied in a boardroom or lounge, Daniel ventured out of the sedan, adopting a purposeful stride as if he were on an errand. He slipped through the service door. Inside, polished hallways stretched in multiple directions. Men in tailored suits strolled past, some looking stressed, others confident. Hugging the walls, Daniel listened for snippets of conversation. He turned a corner and paused by a frosted glass meeting room where raised voices carried through. Charles's tone was unmistakable, authoritative, tinged with impatience. Another voice, calm but firm, responded in legal jargon about post-nuptial clauses and strategic share allocations. Daniel's heart pounded. This was the final puzzle piece. the official move to secure the shift of power right after the wedding. He inched closer, though the muffled glass made it difficult to catch every word. Then he heard Charles clearly. "Victoria has Daniel exactly where we want him. By the time he realizes the scope of our maneuver, it'll be too late." Daniel felt fury course through him. There it was, spelled out plainly. Charles and Victoria were forging a legal snare to claim a significant share of Daniel's company. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to barge into the room and reveal himself, but that move would destroy his cover and let them twist the narrative before he had the upper hand. Glancing at his watch, he realized he couldn't linger. Slipping back the way he came, he returned to the sedan. His mind reeled with plans. Should he present the evidence to a lawyer now? Should he call off the wedding publicly? Should he confront Victoria privately, hoping she might back down? Charles emerged from the country club about 20 minutes later, looking smug. He settled into the back seat without offering a word of explanation. Daniel ignited the engine and navigated back to the mansion. The storm clouds overhead felt like a reflection of his seething anger. When they arrived, Charles turned to him with a sudden, piercing stare. "You look pale, James. Everything all right?" Daniel forced a neutral expression. "Just a headache, sir. The weather changes, I suppose." Charles grunted, stepping out of the car. "We can't have anyone falling ill before the big weekend," he said, though there was zero sympathy in his tone. "Get some rest if you need it. I'll require you for more errands later." He stalked off, leaving Daniel alone in the driveway. Gripping the steering wheel, Daniel felt a swirl of emotions. The time for caution was quickly ending. Every fiber of his being told him a confrontation was imminent, whether with Charles, Victoria, or both. Before he could decide on his next step, his burner phone vibrated. John's text flashed across the small screen. "Urgent. Call me." Daniel found a quiet corner near the garages and dialed. "I've been tracking some unusual share movements," John said, voice low and direct. "It looks like they're preparing a transfer of stock in your name. If they finalize this before you say I do, it could get complicated. Are you ready to act?" Daniel inhaled sharply. "Yes," he murmured. "It's time to face them. I'm done hiding." He ended the call, glancing at the storm-darkened sky. He'd come to the Hamptons disguised as a driver, seeking proof of betrayal. He had it in spades. Now, only one path remained, stepping out of the shadows and demanding answers. Even if it meant risking his reputation and possibly the public spectacle of a cancelled wedding, he had no choice but to confront the truth head-on. By the following evening, a sharp wind swept across the sprawling lawns, scattering petals from half-arranged floral displays. Staff hurried to secure decorations that threatened to blow away. Inside the mansion, a formal dinner was underway for close relatives and honored guests. Elegant dresses and tailored suits moved about the foyer. Laughter and the clink of crystal echoed across the marble floors, though beneath the surface, everyone seemed on edge. Dressed in his plain black suit, Daniel stayed near the entrance, his posture intentionally subdued. He'd spent the day weighing his next move. He had more than enough evidence to prove the Winchesters' intentions. Now, he wrestled with whether to confront Victoria privately or expose the family's wrongdoing in the most public way possible. Either option carried massive consequences. For him, for the Winchester enterprise, and for the many innocent employees who could be caught in the crossfire. He was startled from his thoughts by the arrival of Rachel, who drifted through the front door, carrying a rolled canvas under one arm. A swirl of fresh air followed her inside. She paused upon seeing Daniel, offering a small smile. "I went to paint by the shore," she explained, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "A little windy, but worth it for the view." Daniel returned the smile, though tension weighed on him. "Welcome back. It's getting hectic in there. You might want to brace yourself." Rachel sighed, an expression of dread flickering across her face. "I can feel the pressure already. My aunt and uncle, Victoria's parents, are finishing up final negotiations for something. Everyone's talking in whispers." Her voice dropped. "I hate the secrecy in this family. Seems like every conversation has an agenda." Before Daniel could respond, a butler approached and guided Rachel into the main living area. Daniel caught a glimpse of the swirl of guests. Victoria in a shimmering evening gown, Charles in a crisp charcoal suit, and several new arrivals whose names he didn't know. He recognized them as the men he'd seen at the country club. They nodded politely to the butler as they moved past. Determined, Daniel waited until most guests were occupied with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, then slipped through a side corridor. He navigated his way toward Charles's study. If the older man stored crucial documents or recent notes, they might be there. But as he neared the door, he heard voices inside. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. "She can handle it," Charles said. "We just need her to sign those final addendums. Once that's done, the rest is unstoppable." Daniel's chest tightened. Final addendums to what? A post-nuptial agreement. He leaned closer, trying to pick up more details, but the conversation ended abruptly. Footsteps approached the door. Daniel retreated, ducking into an adjacent room, heart pounding. Peering out, he saw Charles exit the study with a tall man in a navy blue suit. They chatted a moment longer before parting ways. Charles then headed upstairs towards the bedrooms, presumably looking for Victoria. Daniel lingered in the darkened room, aware that his chance to act was imminent. He could sense the pieces sliding into place for the Winchesters, the finishing touches of a grand scheme. He also recognized his own readiness to break the charade. The moment came sooner than expected. Victoria, stepping away from the main crowd, nearly collided with him in the hallway. Instinctively, Daniel bowed his head as though to apologize, but she paused, scrutinizing him with a flicker of curiosity. "You're the new driver." "James," she said, studying him. "Right. What are you doing here in the private corridor?" He forced himself to meet her gaze without betraying the storm of emotions within. "I'm sorry, Ms. Winchester. I was asked to find you and let you know that your father wanted a word." She nodded, looking momentarily distracted. Yet something about the way she examined his face suggested a faint sense of familiarity, a recognition she couldn't place. He held his breath, unsure if the game was up, but she merely tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and brushed past him. "All right, thank you," she murmured as she headed off toward the study. Exhaling, he realized that the confrontation he yearned for was near, maybe not this second, but soon. He couldn't keep up this facade forever. The hush of the corridor pressed in on him, a reminder of all the secrets contained within these walls. If he was going to reveal himself, it had to be in a way that exposed the Winchesters' duplicity without bringing down utter chaos on everyone else, the staff, people like Rachel, and the unsuspecting guests who only saw a glamorous wedding. He returned to the foyer, noticing the renewed swirl of expensive suits and dresses. The dinner was nearing its finale, guests drifting toward the library for a nightcap, or to the music room for a bit of piano entertainment. As he stood by the grand staircase, he caught sight of Rachel, who gave him a kind, questioning look from across the room. He offered a faint nod, silently promising himself that once this was over, he'd explain everything, or at least try to. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and the first drops of rain began to spatter the glass. A storm was coming, inside and out, and Daniel knew there was no way to stop it. The best he could do was see it through and hope he emerged with his dignity and the truth intact. As evening deepened, the estate's corridors took on an otherworldly hush. Most guests retired to their rooms, having indulged in a lavish feast and several rounds of cocktails. Lightning flickered across the sky, casting ghostly silhouettes through the windows. Daniel slipped outside to the veranda, needing air and a moment of solitude. He stared at the restless ocean in the distance, its dark surface occasionally illuminated by jagged forks of lightning. Thoughts churned inside him. He had spent so much time gathering evidence, tiptoeing around the estate, listening at doors. Now the weight of it all pressed heavily on his shoulders. He recalled the early days of his relationship with Victoria, how she'd smiled at him, how her laughter had seemed to light up a room. Had any of that been genuine? Or was it all meticulously planned from the start? A voice behind him drew him from his reverie. "James!" He turned to see Rachel standing there, hugging a light jacket around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, catching the faint glow of the veranda lights. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude. I noticed you come out here and, well, you look like a man with a lot on his mind." Despite his turmoil, Daniel managed a small smile. "That's one way to put it." She took a step closer, following his gaze to the turbulent ocean. "I've lived around here all my life, but storms like this still unsettle me. My mother used to say it's the Earth's way of reminding us how small we are." She paused, studying him. "You seem conflicted about something. I know it's none of my business, but if you need someone to talk to..." His heart clenched. It was Victoria's cousin, offering him sincere kindness, oblivious to the fact that he was set to marry her relative under a veil of lies. He longed to tell her the truth, that the wedding was a sham orchestrated by greed, that he wasn't James at all. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, he placed a hand on the veranda's railing. "Have you ever felt stuck between doing what's right for you and what's right for others?" Rachel considered the question. "Oh, definitely. I chose art over the family business, and it caused a fair bit of tension. Even now, I hear the snide remarks, how I'm wasting my inheritance or not pulling my weight. But in the end, I had to honor what felt genuine in me. Otherwise, I'd lose myself." He nodded, feeling the resonance of her words in his own situation. If he kept his findings secret, he risked losing everything he'd worked for and betraying himself. If he exposed the truth, he might bring the entire wedding to a crashing halt, humiliating the Winchesters in front of the social elite. Then there was the staff, the countless employees in both companies, and the ripple effect such a scandal might cause. "It's a tough place to be," Rachel continued softly. "I guess you have to figure out which regrets you can live with." A flash of lightning illuminated her face, revealing sincere concern. Daniel swallowed hard, torn between gratitude for her empathy and guilt for deceiving her. "Thank you," he managed. "Your perspective helps." Before she could ask more, the veranda doors swung open, and Victoria stepped out. She wore a sleek, emerald green evening dress, her posture poised despite the hour. She raised a brow at Rachel, then shifted her gaze to Daniel. "There you are," Victoria said to Rachel, her tone polite but cool. "We were looking for you inside. Uncle David wanted to see your latest painting." Rachel gave Victoria a fleeting nod and then turned to Daniel with a kind smile. "Good night. And good luck with whatever's on your mind." She left, the soft click of her heels echoing against the tiled floor. Victoria lingered, eyeing Daniel as if she couldn't quite place him. "James, isn't it?" Daniel inclined his head. "Yes, Ms. Winchester." "Anything I can do for you?" She hesitated, a flicker of recognition dancing across her features, perhaps a trace of Daniel's familiar shape, or maybe just curiosity. Another rumble of thunder broke the moment. She cleared her throat. No, I suppose not. Thank you anyway." She disappeared inside, and Daniel stood alone once again, the storm raging around him. But in the midst of the wind and the pounding surf, he felt a curious sense of calm growing in his chest. The time for tiptoeing and half measures was nearly over. Rachel's gentle reminder had crystallized his resolve. If he continued living this lie, he would lose the last shred of self-respect he had. Turning away from the ocean, he stepped back inside. The mansion's lights glowed brightly, but they felt as cold as the lightning slicing through the skies. Within those walls were people who thought they controlled everything, orchestrating others' lives like pieces on a chessboard. Yet amid the tension, Daniel felt a renewed certainty take hold. Soon, he would reveal his true identity and the hidden conspiracies that threatened to unravel far more than a single wedding day. The following morning dawned with a sense of impending finality. Clouds still lingered from the storm, casting a dull glow over the estate. Daniel, who had slept only fitfully, emerged from his small staff quarters, feeling as though he were carrying the weight of an entire corporation on his shoulders. The wedding rehearsal was set for that evening, and after that, just one more day until the ceremony. He stepped into the staff lounge, where Rick and Clara were discussing the logistics of the dinner service. They greeted him with tired smiles, but Daniel couldn't muster more than a brief nod. He had more pressing matters to consider. Having secured a few precious minutes alone, he went to a quiet alcove by the kitchen entrance and checked the burner phone. A single text from John read, "Situation urgent. We need a decision on how to proceed." For a long moment, Daniel stared at the message. The line between deception and honesty, between self-preservation and compassion, had grown razor-thin. He could, at any moment, walk into that mansion's grand foyer, tear off the mask of James Whitley, and confront Victoria and her family in front of everyone. Yet the fallout would be catastrophic. Maybe the only way was a direct, private confrontation first, one that would give Victoria a chance to explain herself or retreat before everything exploded. He texted John back, planning direct talk with Victoria. "Keep legal on standby." Then, steeling himself, he went to find Victoria. It took some time, weaving through hallways alive with decorators and staff. Eventually, he spotted her at the far end of a sunlit corridor, reviewing floral arrangements with one of the wedding planners. Summoning his courage, he approached quietly. "Ms. Winchester," he said, forcing calm. "Might I speak with you in private?" She turned, flashing a polite but puzzled smile. "James, right. We're in the middle of finalizing the floral arches for tonight's rehearsal. Is it urgent?" "Yes," he replied, setting his jaw. "It's about a personal matter. It won't take long." Her brow furrowed, but she nodded. With a quick excuse to the wedding planner, Victoria followed him to a smaller side room intended for storing decorations. Crates of ribbons and vases lined the walls, leaving a narrow space where they stood face to face. "All right," she said, crossing her arms. "What is this about?" Daniel's heart hammered. He took a measured breath, recalling her once familiar face, the curve of her cheek, the gentle slope of her nose. "I know this sounds out of place, but I think you should know something about your upcoming marriage." Victoria's expression tightened. "My marriage? What do you mean? How on earth would you, a driver, have any insight into that?" He held her gaze, stepping closer. "Because I'm not just a driver." He pulled the small ID badge, Daniel Matthews's official company ID, out of his pocket and handed it to her. "Look at this." She hesitated, then stared down at the card. Immediately, her eyes widened in shock. "Where did you get—" She broke off, studying the photo closely. A flicker of recognition dawned in her features. "This is impossible. Daniel Matthews is your fiancé," he finished quietly. "I am Daniel Matthews, Victoria." I've been here posing as James for the past week. Her face went pale, and she took a shaky step back, nearly stumbling into a stack of boxes. What kind of sick joke? It's no joke, he replied, his tone sharper than he intended. All his pent-up frustration bubbled to the surface. I had suspicions about your family's intentions, and I needed proof. So I came as someone else, to see the truth for myself. She shook her head violently, eyes flashing with anger and betrayal. You spied on us. You lied to me and my family. He cut her off, voice trembling with emotion. And you lied to me, Victoria. I know about the plan to seize my company's shares after the wedding. I've seen the contracts, overheard the meetings. You and your father have been orchestrating everything. For a heartbeat, all color drained from her face. And he wondered if she would deny it. But instead, her lips parted in silent shock before she spat. You had no right to do this. Daniel's frustration broke loose. I had no right. Have you any idea how it felt to realize the woman I loved might be conspiring against me? To stand by, powerless, as you worked with your father to undermine everything I built. Her eyes glistened with something resembling tears, though her voice remained fierce. You humiliated me, lurking around the estate, listening to private conversations. If you had doubts, why not come to me openly, like an adult? Would you have told me the truth? He demanded. No, and we both know it. Tension crackled between them, thick as the humid air outside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victoria pressed a hand to her forehead as though battling a headache. Daniel, this is more complicated than you think. My father... She hesitated, glancing at him with a mix of desperation and guilt. He expects absolute loyalty. And yes, we discussed ways to protect our family's interests, but protect, Daniel echoed, letting out a bitter laugh. This goes beyond mere protection. You're trying to take over my company the moment we exchange vows. She stared at him, cheeks flushed, tears threatening to spill. You don't know how controlling my father can be. He wanted me to secure an advantage, but I never intended to ruin you, I swear it. His heart thudded. Part of him wanted to believe her, but the documents he'd found and the conversations he'd overheard said otherwise. Then prove it. Put an end to whatever deals you've made. Walk away from the scheme before it's too late. Victoria's eyes flickered with turmoil, her hands trembling by her sides. A swirl of emotion played across her face. Fear, guilt, maybe even regret. But as footsteps echoed in the hall, she cleared her throat, struggling to regain composure. I have to think. This is all happening so fast. Just don't do anything rash, please. Before Daniel could respond, she slipped out of the storage room, leaving him grappling with a storm of questions. Had his bold revelations sparked genuine remorse in her, or was she simply stalling for time, hoping to salvage the plan? He had no idea which it would be. All he knew was that the lines were finally drawn, and there was no turning back. In the hours following his confrontation with Victoria, Daniel prowled the mansion's corridors, battling a swirl of conflicting emotions. Rage, heartbreak, and an urgent need for resolution all vied for attention. Part of him felt oddly relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. He no longer had to play the unassuming driver while his future in-laws schemed behind his back. Yet the aftermath felt perilously fragile. One wrong move could detonate a bomb that would obliterate reputations, businesses, and personal bonds. As the day progressed toward late afternoon, guests started arriving in formal attire for the rehearsal event. Daniel avoided them all, slipping behind decorative pillars and taking servants' passages whenever a group approached. He was in no mood to exchange pleasantries with people who congratulated him on an engagement they believed to be real and pure. He found a momentary haven in an underused library sitting room. But his reprieve lasted only a few minutes before Charles Winchester stormed in, eyes blazing. The door slammed shut behind him. "I've just spoken with Victoria," Charles growled, pointing an accusatory finger at Daniel. "She told me everything about your little disguise, your pathetic espionage. How dare you violate my home like this?" Daniel stiffened. "I wouldn't have come to these extremes if you hadn't been plotting to hijack my company. Don't stand there and pretend you're outraged when you've been orchestrating a takeover behind my back." Charles's nostrils flared. "Watch your tone. You're on my property, addressing the father of your supposed fiancé. That fiancé is half the reason I'm here." Daniel shot back, voice quivering with unspent fury. "You might have strong-armed her, convinced her she needed to do this for the sake of your family's empire, but don't pretend she's blameless. I found her signature on those documents." A flash of uncertainty crossed Charles's face, but he covered it with a cold sneer. "People sign all sorts of papers in business. It doesn't mean a conspiracy. Have you considered that your paranoia might be clouding your judgment?" Daniel barked out a laugh devoid of humor. "My paranoia is well-founded. You want post-nuptial clauses that automatically alter my board's structure. I overheard your conversation with your lawyers. I've read your notes. It's all right there in black and white." Charles advanced a step, and Daniel caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with anger. "Even if that were true, do you think you can simply waltz out of here, blow the whistle, and remain unscathed? We'll destroy your reputation, tie you up in lawsuits. You may have wealth, but don't underestimate the Winchesters' reach." Daniel met Charles's glare unflinchingly. "Go ahead and try. I'll do what I must to protect my company. Your intimidation tactics won't work on me." For a split second, they stood in stalemate, two powerful men at odds. Charles's expression wavered between disdain and grudging respect, as though he hadn't expected Daniel to stand so firm. With a derisive snort, Charles turned on his heel. "This is far from over. If you know what's good for you, you'll keep quiet and proceed with the wedding. You still stand to gain from this union, if you'd only open your eyes." "I'd rather walk away with my integrity," Daniel shot back, "than stay married to corruption." Charles paused at the door, head tilted in that arrogant way he had. "Then you'll be making a grave mistake." He wrenched the door open, letting it slam behind him. Daniel let out a shaky breath, adrenaline still coursing through him. He realized his hands were balled into fists. The conversation with Charles underscored how high the stakes were. Exposing the Winchesters could spark a public scandal, one that might threaten his own company's stability, yet giving in to their demands would mean surrendering to a miserable, loveless arrangement, or worse, forging a life of constant deception. Moments later, the door creaked again, and Rachel peered inside. Her eyes traveled from Daniel's rigid stance to the closed door, worry etched across her features. "I heard raised voices. Are you all right?" He let his fists relax. "I'm fine. Just an argument with Mr. Winchester." She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to press for details. Then she simply said, "I don't know what's going on, but please be careful. My uncle can be ruthless. I'd hate to see you get hurt." Her concern touched him. "I appreciate that," he said softly, "but I'm afraid I have to face him, and possibly everyone else, if things get worse." Rachel hesitated, a fleeting sadness in her eyes. "Well, if you need an ally, know that I'm here." Then, with a tiny, kind smile, she withdrew, leaving Daniel to the swirl of thoughts crowding his mind. The time was close for the rehearsal, which was due to start in less than an hour. Normally, a wedding rehearsal would be a cheerful dry run, a chance for family members to stand at the altar, tease the bride and groom, and share in the excitement. But tonight, it felt like a choreographed deception. Any smile he offered would be forced. Any vow he rehearsed would be hollow. Stepping from the library, Daniel walked through the corridors. the hush of the estate broken only by the distant hum of chatter and classical music. He could sense that everything was building to a crescendo. Whether by his hand or by the Winchester's manipulations, the fragile facade of this wedding would soon shatter, one way or another. He pushed open the doors to the grand ballroom, where chairs were arranged for the rehearsal. Rows of seatbacks faced a small stage, where the officiant would presumably stand. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and tension. The sight reminded him that in mere hours, he'd stand with Victoria in front of 100 guests, or he'd walk away from it all, exposing secrets that might destroy an entire family's legacy. As the mansion's ornate clock chimed the hour, Daniel's heart thundered in tandem. He knew he was on the brink of a moment that would define the rest of his life. And no matter the choice he made, there would be no turning back. Daniel stood at the edge of the ballroom, staring at the rows of chairs set up for the rehearsal. Guests in formal attire milled about, exchanging polite greetings and nervously joking about the big day. A small orchestra was tuning up in the corner, ready to practice the wedding march. Every polished surface, crystal chandeliers, gold-accented columns, seemed to reflect the extravagance the Winchesters were known for. Yet to Daniel, it felt like a hollow stage for an elaborate farce. Victoria entered through a side door with her parents in tow. She wore a simple ivory sheath dress, a prelude to tomorrow's full bridal gown, but her normally impeccable hairstyle was slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running her hands through it in frustration. Their eyes met across the room. She paused for a moment, uncertainty etched on her face. Then, as though gathering courage, she walked toward him, weaving between the chairs. When she reached him, her voice was subdued. "We should rehearse," she said. "People are watching." He glanced around. Indeed, the wedding coordinator was impatiently checking her watch, and family members were eyeing the couple with polite curiosity. Daniel noticed Charles lurking behind one of the columns, clearly overseeing the proceedings with a steely gaze. Rachel hovered near the back, her expression anxious. Without a word, Daniel offered Victoria his arm. They moved to the makeshift altar, where the officiant, a dignified older gentleman, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he intoned, gesturing for the families and wedding party to take their places. As the coordinator lined up the bridesmaids and groomsmen, Daniel felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The small string ensemble started a tentative rendition of a classical processional. He and Victoria were meant to stand side by side at the front, looking adoringly into each other's faces. But as the music swelled, every muscle in Daniel's body tensed. How could he play the part of the besotted fiancé when he knew what this wedding truly represented? He dared a sideways glance at Victoria. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her features drawn. To the onlookers, she might appear simply nervous about the impending nuptials, but Daniel recognized the conflict written in the tightness of her jaw. His own anger had simmered all day, but something about seeing her now, so visibly torn, made him wonder if there was still a shred of genuine remorse behind her eyes. At the end of the musical phrase, the officiant gestured for silence. "Tomorrow, we will witness the union of two remarkable individuals, Daniel and Victoria, in sacred matrimony," he began, voice warm. "But tonight, we gather to rehearse the ceremony and ensure that—" "I can't do this," Daniel said abruptly. A murmur rippled through the guests. The officiant lowered his notes, taken aback. Victoria turned to Daniel, her eyes widening in alarm. "What are you—" "I can't stand up here tomorrow pretending everything is perfect," he continued, projecting his voice to reach the entire room. His gaze swept over the guests, many of them stunned into silence. "I know you all came expecting a celebration, but the truth is, this wedding is built on lies." Some people gasped. Others whispered or glanced at one another, confused. Charles stepped forward, face reddening. "Daniel," he said in a warning tone, "this is not the time or place for honesty," Daniel retorted, not backing down. "It's precisely the time, because if I go through with this wedding, it would be the biggest lie of my life." His eyes locked with Victoria's. "We both know what's really been going on." Her lips parted, but no words emerged. Tears glistened at the corners of her eyes, and she looked away, unable to hold his stare. Rachel, in the back, covered her mouth, stricken. Daniel inhaled, forcing himself to keep going. "I came here disguised as a driver, James Whitley, to see if my suspicions were true, and they were. The Winchesters have been planning to seize control of my company right after the wedding. There are documents, post-nuptial arrangements that shift shares and power away from me. It's all part of a carefully orchestrated plan." The crowd erupted into a flurry of shocked whispers and exclamations. Some guests stood, uncertain whether to intervene or remain seated. The wedding coordinator gaped, unsure how to manage this unprecedented outburst. Charles barreled forward, voice booming. "This is absurd. You're making a mockery of my family. I'll have you removed." But Daniel refused to be intimidated. "I have evidence," he announced, his voice shaking only slightly, "and I have no intention of letting myself be manipulated into a marriage based on deception." Victoria took a shaky step toward him, tears trailing down her cheeks. "Daniel, let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. My father pushed me to secure the deal, but He turned to her, sorrow knitting his brow. "Why didn't you come to me? Why not just tell me the truth before it came to this?" She swallowed hard, her face etched with regret. "Because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of losing everything, my father's approval, our family legacy, and maybe even you." A hush fell over the room, the tension thick and almost unbearable. Daniel let out a shaking breath. "You already lost me the moment you chose deception over honesty," he said quietly. "I'm calling off this wedding. I won't walk down that aisle tomorrow under false pretenses." A shocked gasp rippled among the guests, mingled with scattered murmurs of "Oh my God," and "Is he serious?" In the back, Rachel pressed a hand to her heart, eyes brimming with tears, though it was unclear if they were for her cousin or for Daniel himself. Charles thundered, "You can't do this. The paparazzi, the partners, everyone is expecting." Daniel turned on him. "You should have thought about that before you tried to steal my company. Go ahead and spread whatever lies you want. But I have proof of your plans. Try to come after me, and I'll drag every single document into a courtroom." For an endless moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, slowly, Daniel stepped away from the makeshift altar, turning his back on the entire charade. Guests parted as he walked through them, some too stunned to react, others whispering in dismay. Lightning flashed outside the high windows, reflecting off the polished floor like a final punctuation mark on the night's drama. He paused at the exit, casting one last look at Victoria. She stood frozen, her father gripping her arm, as though to keep her from running after Daniel. A tremor of anguish flickered across her features. But Daniel didn't linger. With head held high, he slipped through the doors, leaving a wake of shattered expectations, swirling rumors, and a future wholly unknown. The aftermath of Daniel's public confrontation was felt immediately. That same evening, half the guests fled the Hamptons estate, unwilling to be entangled in the scandal of a cancelled wedding. Others remained, mostly out of morbid curiosity, unsure whether they'd witness a last-minute reconciliation or an even more dramatic fallout. Daniel retreated to his small staff room, though at this point the guise of James Whitley was thoroughly shattered. All around him, employees whispered in confusion, "He was Daniel Matthews all along." Some expressed sympathy, believing he'd been wronged. Others were simply stunned. The staff lounge buzzed with speculation about what might happen next. Feeling suffocated, Daniel slipped out a side exit and wandered the estate grounds. The previous night's storm had blown over, leaving puddles that reflected the pale moonlight. He had no destination in mind, he just needed to breathe, to think. With the wedding cancelled, he was free, yet his heart felt painfully heavy. He found himself at the edge of the property near a quiet grove of trees. Leaning against the trunk of a large oak, he stared at the distant horizon, where the ocean shimmered faintly under the moon's glow. The magnitude of what had happened weighed on him. He'd just broken off a marriage, humiliated one of New York's most powerful families, and possibly invited legal and media backlash that could ripple into his own enterprise. But none of that hurt as much as the realization that the love he'd believed in was built on shifting sands. As angry as he was, a part of him still ached for the times when Victoria seemed sincere, her laughter, her support during stressful moments, the warmth he thought they shared. Was it all an act? Or was she, too, a victim of her father's manipulation? Footsteps rustled behind him. Startled, he turned, half expecting to see Charles in a rage or Victoria in tears. Instead, it was Rachel. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, hair lightly tousled by the cool breeze. "I'm sorry," she murmured, stopping a few paces away, as though gauging whether he'd welcome her presence. "I wanted to make sure you were all right, or at least as all right as you can be." He let out a slow exhale, leaning his back against the oak. "I don't think I've processed everything yet. It feels like I just set off an explosion." She inched closer, her expression pained. It was quite a scene, but at least it was honest. "And if it helps, I believe you did the right thing." Daniel studied her face, touched by her unwavering empathy. "I just wish the right thing didn't have to hurt so many people, myself included." Rachel wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to ward off the chill. "My family." She hesitated, choosing her words with care. "They have a way of making everything about status and control." I saw the look on Victoria's face. She's not entirely blameless, but she's also not the only one orchestrating this. My uncle's influence is strong. He nodded, gaze drifting to the silhouette of the mansion. Light still glowed in the windows, though many rooms were darkened after the rehearsal's collapse. "I know Charles drove a lot of this, but she signed those documents. She didn't warn me. That's hard to forgive." A troubled silence stretched between them. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out, and the gentle lapping of waves reached their ears. Softly, Rachel spoke again. "You'll have to decide if forgiveness is even an option. But for now, maybe focus on what comes next for you. You've built a life and a company on your own terms. You can leave here with your head high." She reached out, tentatively placing a hand on his arm. The contact was light, but comforting. Daniel looked at her, emotions roiling in his chest. Part of him wanted to trust this moment of solace, to believe that not all Winchesters were the same. Another part was exhausted, wary of letting anyone from this family get too close. "Thank you," he said finally, covering her hand gently with his, "for being the one genuine person in that house." A bittersweet smile curved her lips. "I'm not sure about that, but I try." "Daniel," she hesitated, then continued more softly, "I know it's not my place to ask, but what will you do now?" He glanced back at the mansion once more. "First, I need to collect my things, call my lawyers, and protect my company. Then," he shrugged, a hollow ache in his voice, "I guess I go home to Manhattan and figure out how to live with the fact that the person I thought I loved never truly existed." Rachel swallowed, her eyes glistening. "If you need anything, someone to talk to, or just a quiet place away from the city, you know where to find me." I'll be here at least until the dust settles." Daniel's throat tightened, a mix of gratitude and sadness swirling through him. He offered her a gentle nod, not trusting himself to speak. Then they lapsed into silence, letting the night's cool air wash over them. In that quiet, he felt a tentative sense of release, as though a long-held breath was finally being exhaled. The wedding that was supposed to unite two powerful families had crumbled, but he realized that he might walk away with something more precious, a chance at discovering genuine connections, untainted by greed. For now, he cherished Rachel's concern like a lifeline in a storm, uncertain of tomorrow, but resolved to face it on his own terms. By the next morning, word of the cancelled wedding had spread like wildfire. The internet and gossip columns were ablaze with speculation. Headlines splashed across news websites: tech mogul's wedding scandal, secret motives exposed, and Winchester family under fire as engagement ends abruptly. Daniel's phone buzzed non-stop with calls and messages, many from reporters seeking an exclusive interview. He sat on a low wooden bench outside the mansion, phone in hand, scanning emails from his lawyers. The legal team had already drafted statements declaring Daniel's intent to cut personal ties with the Winchesters. They assured him they'd stand by, ready to counter any defamation the Winchesters might throw at him. The essential point remained: Daniel had enough evidence of the takeover plan to protect himself, even if it meant a drawn-out legal skirmish. Staff bustled around him, loading suitcases into cars for departing guests. In the distance, he heard Charles's voice raised in anger, presumably on a call with someone important. He wasn't sure if Charles was more furious about losing the marriage alliance or the potential fallout threatening his real estate empire. At around midday, Rachel appeared, carrying a small box in her hands. She approached Daniel, stopping a few feet away. "I found these among the leftover wedding items. Thought you might want them." She handed him the box. Inside were the crystal champagne flutes, engraved with D and V, that had been meant for the ceremony toast. He peered at the delicate etchings, a pang hitting him in the chest. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm not sure what I'll do with them. Maybe donate them somewhere." Rachel's smile was sad but understanding. "I figured it just felt wrong to leave them lying around for someone else to toss away." He nodded, grateful for her thoughtfulness. Over the last day, she'd shown him more kindness than he'd ever expected to find in the Winchester home. In return, he'd done what he could to protect her from the roiling chaos, knowing she had enough problems with her family's disapproval. They found a shady spot near a fountain, water trickling gently from a carved stone sculpture. The day was bright, a stark contrast to the tension that clung to every corner of the estate. Together, they sat in reflective silence, letting the sound of the cascading water soothe their spirits. After a moment, Rachel spoke up. "I'm planning on leaving too, not just the estate, maybe the whole family business for good. I've got savings from art sales, and I could rent a small studio in Manhattan, or even somewhere else." She paused, fiddling with the hem of her jacket. Sometimes, one event changes everything, makes you realize what you need to do. Daniel studied her. "You've always been different from them. You deserve a life without all this manipulation." She glanced away, exhaling shakily. "I still feel guilty, leaving Victoria in this mess. Despite everything, she's my cousin, and there's a part of me that wishes she'd wake up and free herself from our family's control." Her eyes flicked back to his. "But that's her choice. I can't fix it." He set the champagne flutes aside. "We can only fix ourselves, I guess, and that's enough of a challenge." Together, they walked back toward the house. In the foyer, staff were dismantling half-finished flower arrangements, returning vases, and packing decorations into boxes. A sense of anticlimax permeated the once grand space. Daniel couldn't help reflecting on how quickly pomp and spectacle had turned into quiet dismantling. As they passed the main staircase, a hesitant voice called out, "Daniel!" He looked up to see Victoria descending the steps. She wore casual jeans and a sweater, her face wan and eyes rimmed with dark circles. Rachel excused herself, offering a supportive nod to Daniel before stepping aside. Victoria walked over, her arms folded protectively across her chest. She drew a shaky breath. I'm sorry," she began, voice trembling. "I shouldn't expect you to forgive me, but I had to say it." Daniel held her gaze, his expression pained. "What do you want me to say, Victoria?" She pressed her lips together. "Maybe I need to hear that there was a time when you did love me, that not everything was a lie." His heart felt heavy. He thought back to their early dates, the laughter, the surprising moments of tenderness. "I loved who I thought you were," he answered quietly. "I'm not sure where the real you ends and where your father's ambitions begin." She flinched. "I suppose I deserve that. Look, I'm returning those documents to his lawyer. I can't undo the damage, but I'm not going to pursue any part of that plan. It's over, and if he tries to force me, I'll say no." He let out a slow breath. "That's something. I hope you follow through, for your own sake, but I can't rebuild trust that's been shattered." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. "I understand." "I wish things had been different." Without waiting for him to respond, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. Daniel felt a twisted sense of closure. He knew it would take time, maybe a lifetime, to move past the heartbreak, but her words signaled a small shift, a choice to break away from Charles's manipulations, even if it came too late to salvage what they once shared. After a moment, Rachel rejoined him, eyes filled with gentle sympathy. "Are you okay?" He managed a tiny nod. "I will be." They headed toward the front entrance, where Daniel had a car waiting to take him back to Manhattan. On the way out, he paused by one of the tall mirrors in the foyer, catching a glimpse of himself standing beside Rachel. The reflection showed two people who'd grown weary of the Winchester domain, each determined to forge a more honest path ahead. Leaving behind the extravagance and deceit felt strangely liberating, like discarding a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. A week after the cancelled wedding, Daniel stood on the terrace of his Manhattan penthouse, gazing at the evening skyline. The sun had nearly set, painting the horizon in soft oranges and purples. Below him, the city hummed with life, taxis streaming, distant sirens echoing, and pedestrians bustling to wherever they needed to be. He inhaled the familiar scent of concrete and opportunity, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in months. The days following his departure from the Hamptons had been hectic. He'd met with lawyers and PR advisors, issuing official statements to protect his company from any Winchester retaliation. Though a few tabloids tried to spin lurid tales about him staging the wedding drama for publicity, the more reputable business press largely sided with him, especially once hints of the post-nuptial conspiracy leaked. The Winchesters, meanwhile, retreated from the public eye. No doubt Charles was scrambling to control the damage. Despite it all, Daniel felt an unexpected sense of freedom. He no longer needed to question the sincerity of his fiancée or constantly guard his back. The heartbreak still lingered, but there was hope in knowing he had severed a toxic union before it could inflict irreparable harm. A discreet knock at the terrace door made him turn. John stepped outside, carrying a folder under his arm. Daniel greeted him with a nod. "How are things on the business front?" John offered a small, reassuring smile. "We're stable, considering the circumstances. The board is relieved you dodged what could have been a corporate nightmare. I've also got some preliminary updates on potential new investors. ones not tied to the Winchesters. Daniel took the folder, flipping through the documents. "Thank you, John," he said, scanning the pages. "And thanks for everything you did out there in the Hamptons. I know this wasn't a typical assignment." John's expression softened. "You're welcome. I'm just glad you came out of it mostly intact. Everything else can be fixed with time and resources." He left Daniel to the paperwork, returning inside to handle other tasks. A cool breeze brushed across the terrace. Daniel set the documents aside, letting his gaze wander to the horizon again. He might have lost a wedding and the illusions of a perfect love, but he'd regained control of his life and ensured his company remained in safe hands. His phone buzzed on the terrace table, drawing his attention. The caller ID displayed Rachel's name. He answered with a slight smile. "Hey." "Hi, Daniel," she replied warmly. "How's Manhattan life treating you?" "Better than I expected," he admitted. "And you? Have you gotten away from that estate?" "I have. I'm in a small loft in Brooklyn right now, found a short-term rental that doubles as an art studio. It's a bit rough around the edges, but it feels like a new start." A hint of pride filled his voice. "That's good to hear. You deserve a clean slate." She paused, as if gathering her courage. "Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to drop by sometime. I mean, if you're comfortable. I'd love to show you my latest paintings, and, well, I could use a friend here." His heart did a small flip. The thought of seeing Rachel again, away from the toxic environment of the Winchester mansion, stirred an unanticipated warmth inside him. "I'd like that," he said honestly. "Great," she replied, the relief evident in her tone. "I'll text you the address. No pressure if you can't make it soon, but know you're always welcome." They ended the call with a mutual sense of camaraderie that felt a world apart from the heartbreak he'd just endured. Daniel leaned against the terrace railing, phone in hand, reflecting on how strange life could be. A few weeks ago, he'd been on the brink of tying himself to Victoria in a grand, loveless ceremony. Now he stood free, perhaps a little bruised, but wiser and strangely open to the next chapter. He went inside and gathered his keys. Compelled by a spontaneous urge, he decided to pay a visit to his mother in Boston, a short trip by helicopter or car. She had been calling and texting non-stop, worried about the public drama and his emotional state. He realized he owed it to her and to himself to reconnect, to ground himself in familial warmth that required no masks or corporate deals. Before leaving, he paused in his living room, where the sunlight filtered through large windows, illuminating the tasteful modern furnishings. The box of engraved wedding flutes from the Hamptons sat on a side table, unopened since he returned. Approaching it carefully, he lifted one flute, running his finger over the intertwined initials, D and V. The memory of that confrontation in the mansion flooded back, along with the searing pain of betrayal. But he set the glass down gently. Those initials no longer signaled a promise of a future together. They were merely remnants of a path he chose not to walk. Perhaps in time, he'd discard them entirely or repurpose the crystal for something else. For now, they served as a reminder of what he had learned. Trust can't be bought or orchestrated, and genuine love has no room for manipulation. With that quiet acknowledgement, Daniel secured his penthouse, set the flutes aside, and made his way to the elevator. As it descended, he took in a final deep breath. The city was waiting below, vibrant, full of possibility. So was a life free from deceit and burdensome secrets. Whatever came next, whether it involved rebuilding his heart, focusing on philanthropic endeavors, or even exploring that gentle bond with Rachel, he would face it with honesty. He stepped out onto the busy street, blending into the flow of Manhattan's ever-moving crowd. no longer hidden as James Whitley, no longer a groom bound by suspicious vows. He was simply Daniel Matthews, a man determined to stand on his own terms. And in that quietly resolute decision, he discovered a flicker of hope kindling where heartbreak once reigned, a promise that, in the end, a future shaped by truth could be infinitely brighter than any illusion propped up by wealth or pretense. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.